The young lady rode leisurely in the carriage, finding herself in the capital of the empire for the first time, and absorbed its grandeur with quiet delight. She looked at the buildings with admiration, realizing that their power and beauty surpassed even the images of the Imperial palace from books. Madame was taken aback when she caught the whisper that suddenly arose around her young companion. The couple looked at the girl with mocking interest, as if trying to guess what kind of wilderness she grew up in, since she was so openly amazed. They were puzzled by the noise that had been raised, and the young lady, with a sinking heart, realized that they were talking about her. Then Madame gently took her hand, distracting her from her worries, and with a slight warmth drew her attention to the unfading beauty of the city. The lady, with a timid smile, sought support in the headmistress's gaze, and she, reservedly but sincerely, shared her excitement about the capital. Madame pointed to a bustling market, full of colors and aromas, and the girl perked up, encountering such abundance for the first time. Soon her gaze fell again on her companions, whose grins only emphasized their disdainful attitude. The man spoke slowly, as if condescendingly, that they should examine everything, since such a chance was rare for a provincial child. Madame, maintaining her dignity, only gently dismissed their participation, making it clear that the fate of her ward had already been determined. The interlocutors straightened up arrogantly, but the man was confused, not expecting to hear such confident words. He grinned in disbelief, deciding that he was dealing with nothing but victims of empty promises and deception. But Madame, with proud confidence, revealed the truth about her pupil's future, leaving no room for doubt. Those present froze, stunned by what they heard, unable to immediately believe it. Everyone knew how difficult it was to get into such a place, even for nobles, and so the news sounded almost unbelievable. Evie looked at the headmistress with quiet joy, feeling like the happiest person in the world. A moment came to mind when Madame, without hiding her tears, believed in her brilliant future and the power of her mind. Evie clearly understood that without this woman, her dream would have remained unattainable. Some time ago, Madame stopped at the hotel, hoping to rest, but a sudden rumble disturbed the peace and made her start. The woman, in a rage, pushed the girl out into the street, showering her with cruel insults and cold contempt. Her anger burned at the thought that, having sheltered the orphan, she received neither gratitude nor benefit in return. The screams did not subside, and the young lady, trembling with horror, only silently begged for forgiveness, ready to do anything for a roof over her head. Then the madam could not bear it any longer, and stood up for the child, shocked by the cruelty with which the defenseless girl was treated. She glanced anxiously at Evie, whose pale face was still shaking, trying to make sure she was unharmed. The madame looked sternly at the woman, doubting whether she cared about the girl, but in response, she saw only cold mockery and indifference. The woman flared up with anger, not understanding what right the madame had to interfere in someone else's fate. At that very moment, Madame decisively announced her intention to take the child, which caused genuine amazement. The woman, having quickly recovered, began to calculate the benefits, assessing the years the girl had spent under her roof. She named a huge sum, which made even the lady lose her composure for a moment. The young lady, trembling, tried to assure everyone that she was okay, hiding her fear. But Madame hugged her tightly, as if shielding her from the whole world, and made a difficult decision. Her gaze hardened as she made it clear that the girl would go with her. Then she looked at the child more softly, promising safety and a new life without words. Madame's embrace was warm and sincere, and one could feel deep compassion and understanding for what had happened. Thus began life in the orphanage, where work and study were intertwined in a harsh but honest everyday life. One day, while going out on business, the girl became an unwitting witness to a quarrel among friends. The reason was food, a painful and all too familiar topic for her. She approached them with gentle kindness, trying to ease the tension. In her hands was a modest piece of bread, given away with quiet self-denial. Thanks to the headmistress's care, life became easier, but anxiety and shortages still did not go away. Then, her attention was drawn to an advertisement for recruitment to the Imperial Academy. The lines of the decree promised a chance for a new destiny, and particularly touched her heart. The learning environment seemed almost miraculous, care and support she could only dream of before. Evie knew she could ease the headmistress's burden if she became successful and independent, but she also clearly realized that frankness would only cause unnecessary anxiety for the one who was protecting her. so she quietly expressed her desire to learn, hiding her true motives behind a sincere smile. That night, after sending the application, she was left alone with her deepest thoughts. Memories of her parents painfully squeezed her heart, and she tried to drive them away. But the desire to be accepted became almost a desperate plea, in which an involuntary call to those who were not there sounded. Not knowing their fate and the reasons for their separation, she still could not get rid of bitter suspicions. And despite everything, deep in her soul, there lived a quiet hope to see them again at least once. After some time, they finally arrived at the Academy for the Gifted, where everything seemed majestic and alien. Madame and her companion were amazed, for it seemed as if the entire empire had flocked there. Soon the man stepped forward, attracting the attention of everyone gathered. His gaze became stern as he announced the rules separating children from their parents. He made it clear that each student must enter alone, otherwise the path to learning would be closed. There was a stir among the children, as the fear of separation from their families gripped their hearts. Madame looked around, noticing the commotion around her, but her pupil remained surprisingly calm. This puzzled the woman, because for most of them, this was the first painful separation. She glanced furtively at the girl, realizing that for her, everything that was happening was an unknown world. But Madame was taken aback when she saw the tender smile with which the young lady calmly accepted the moment of separation. These words touched her heart, but she was even more struck by the child's extraordinary calm. The madam understood that the crying around her could easily break even an adult, but the girl remained steadfast. Evie, with a soft light in her eyes, tried to reassure her mentor, determined to move forward. The woman sighed heavily, realizing that her own tears were unnecessary now. Evie was embarrassed to see the tears of the one who always seemed strong to her. The sudden embrace took her by surprise, but there was a deep affection in it. Madame's gaze was full of feelings, in which anxiety and endless care were intertwined. With particular tenderness, she made it clear that the doors of her home would always be open. The girl responded sincerely to this warmth, accepting it with all her heart. While running away, she nevertheless turned around, maintaining a bright farewell smile. Madame looked after her for a long time, hoping that a happy fate awaited her. The girl felt this gaze, and for a moment, her steps slowed. In the woman's heart, there lived only one desire: for the child to grow up happy and free. For a while, the teachers watched the new students closely, feeling a quiet joy that the academy had finally reopened its doors. But suddenly, the man froze, noticing a fragile girl among the crowd, too young for these places, which immediately caused him to feel anxious and perplexed. He sighed heavily, realizing that in front of him stood the very same Evie about whom conflicting rumors had already begun to circulate. Just recently, at a meeting, they discussed a girl whose successes seemed questionable and caused discontent among those present. One of the men warmly reminded her of her family's merits during the war, not noticing how he raised his voice even in front of the emperor. He sighed again, realizing that all this noise and controversy was solely about the fate of the academy. The Imperial Academy was a special place, directly connected to the palace and designed for the education of truly gifted children. However, after the War of Succession, it remained closed for many years, and only now its opening was supposed to confirm the stability of the empire. Despite the country's recovery, the academy did not accept students due to the emperor's grief over the loss of Princess Vivian. The empress and her newborn daughter died tragically, leaving behind only the pain that the emperor carried in his heart. The girl lived only for a few moments, and the emperor mourned the daughter he was never able to see with his own eyes. Observing his silent melancholy, some courtiers began to hatch ambitious and selfish plans. They hoped that their children would be able to attract the attention of the emperor and thereby change the fate of their families. But, having sensed the hidden intentions of the nobility, the emperor delayed the opening of the academy for a long time until he finally gave permission. While looking through the applicant's documents, the man suddenly froze, noticing something that stood out from the crowd. Without thinking, he discarded one modest statement as if it did not deserve attention. This act did not go unnoticed, and the emperor immediately felt anger flare up within him. He immediately called the chancellor over, and he, not understanding the reason, froze in confusion. The emperor calmly asked to raise the document, but there was a hidden severity in his voice. The chancellor froze for a moment, realizing that the situation was taking an unexpected turn. The emperor approached the man, demanding an explanation as to why he had so easily rejected the submitted application. He, visibly shaking, justified himself by saying that the candidate clearly did not meet the established requirements. The emperor looked at him with cold bewilderment, not finding any reason to refuse the girl. The man confusedly explained that the girl came from an orphanage, and this seemed to him a weighty argument. He almost shouted that the academy could determine the heir, and therefore such a decision seemed unacceptable. But the emperor abruptly cut off these thoughts, asking who had allowed the academy to be turned into an instrument for choosing the heir. He reminded that its goal is to find and educate talented people, and not to follow the prejudices of the nobility. He noted with surprise that the girl passed the senior-level exams, showing outstanding results in all subjects. Hearing this, everyone present was amazed and could not hide their amazement. The chancellor understood that such exams were usually taken by teenagers, and the girl's result seemed almost incredible. Yet he realized that the resistance of the aristocrats was inevitable, and in many ways predictable. He couldn't condemn them entirely, because the academy was a closed world with a strict limitation on places. Every place was worth its weight in gold, and the thought of taking in an orphan only increased the tension among the nobility. However, the emperor was not going to give in and showed unexpected determination in this matter. His words about his own habits sounded strange, but they concealed a deep meaning and intention. The chancellor was at a loss, unable to predict what actions this sudden statement would lead to. The emperor, having looked at everyone closely, firmly confirmed his decision to accept the girl into the academy. Those present froze in complete stupefaction, not believing what they were hearing. When leaving, the emperor left the resolution of the remaining issues to their conscience, not wishing to participate in disputes any longer. Their voices tried to stop him, but he ignored them, paying attention only to the chancellor. He instructed him to personally oversee the enrollment and prevent injustice due to the children's origins. The chancellor meekly agreed and hurried back to the waiting aristocrats. They immediately surrounded him, trying to find out the emperor's will and hoping to hear a hint about the heir. However, the chancellor coldly conveyed the order for equal treatment of everyone, without adding anything superfluous. He emphasized that the emperor did not even ask about the girl's name, thereby trying to reduce tension. He then took the rejected application, wanting to finally find out who was behind that name. After a while, the young lady approached Madame and greeted her warmly, maintaining a sincere smile. Melody responded with the same softness, ready to help her get used to the new place. Evie was drawn to her with keen interest, wanting to quickly learn everything about the world around her. Melody thought about the girl's difficult journey with concern, remembering the distance indicated on her documents. Evie, however, recalled with a slight joy the road filled with discoveries, because for her, everything that was happening was the first and truly wonderful. Melody gently reminded the girl of the need to be careful, because everything around her was new and unfamiliar, full of hidden rules. She then handed her the freshman handbook, which contained a detailed map of the campus and the first landmarks of this vast place. She explained that the academy has many classrooms and buildings, and it's easy to get lost without preparation, but help can always be found from the staff. At that very moment, the young lady became engrossed in reading with keen interest, gratefully accepting each page as part of a new world. Melody noticed how attentively the girl was studying the book and calmly made it clear that there was no need to rush. But soon, the young lady looked up with a slight smile, as if she had easily absorbed everything that was written. Melody was genuinely surprised by such speed, because such a memory seemed rare, even among the academy students. The realization flashed through her mind that before her was a child with truly outstanding abilities. She suggested that the girl keep the book for herself, since similar reference books were given to every student anyway. Evie accepted the gift with genuine joy, holding her own book for the first time in her life, which filled her heart with warmth. The girl thought about the future with curiosity, anticipating how many new things she would still learn and receive. After all, the academy fully provided students with everything they needed, from food to clothing and accommodation. Soon the young lady found herself in her new room and looked around with delight, not believing that all of this now belonged to her. Evie quickly walked around every corner, absorbing the details, and her joy only increased with each new discovery. Melody watched this with a slight smile, glad that the girl felt comfortable here. She mentioned that she would soon have a neighbor, and there was a quiet hope in her voice for friendship between them. She also warned that the uniform would be issued the next day, But for now, the girl could calmly get used to it. Evie looked forward to her new life, looking forward to her room, her first book, and even the upcoming dinner. A little while later, she came downstairs and noticed a crowd of children heading to the dining room. With genuine enthusiasm, the young lady hurried towards them, wanting to become part of this new world. She walked along, humming softly, lost in her thoughts, until one of the boys noticed her. His gaze was cold and full of contempt, because he did not understand how a simple girl could end up here. Anger flared up in his soul, because he believed that her place could have gone to him or his brother. This feeling prompted him to decide to teach the girl a lesson, considering her unworthy of the academy. He suddenly reached out to her, wanting to realize his plan as quickly as possible. With a haughty grin, he pushed her, and the girl fell to the ground with a crash. However, when she opened her eyes, she was surprised to find that she felt no pain. Evie was confused, trying to understand what had happened, unable to find an explanation for it. At that very moment, she was overcome with embarrassment when a young man appeared next to her, showing concern. He looked at her attentively, and she, amazed, could not utter a word. For a moment, Evie froze, drowning in his clear blue eyes. They seemed to her like precious stones that had previously existed only on the pages of books. Their depth and purity were mesmerizing, making you forget about everything around you. At that moment, another young man approached them, anxiously assessing the situation. Evie winced and quickly pulled away, trying to hide her embarrassment and regain her composure. The young man looked sullenly at the boys, assessing their insolence, and displeasure and stern menace could be seen in his eyes. He immediately realized that the guys had clearly underestimated the situation and did not know who they were up against. However, he soon froze, hearing the quiet whispers of the other children who were discussing what was happening around them. His gaze darted to the crowd, where everyone was struck by the boys' sudden beauty and their aura of confidence. But a moment later, the young man was frozen with horror when he heard the names of the legendary Lords Arsel and Ruska. Filled with fear, he looked at the tall and stately young men in confusion, not believing what he heard. Thoughts swirled in my head. How could an orphan end up among representatives of the famous houses of the Marquis and the Duke? Feeling embarrassed and panicked, he quickly apologized and ran away, leaving only a trace of a grin behind him. The young man shouted that he remembered his face, and that there was no need to run away so quickly, causing confusion in Evie. He looked closely at the girl, and mentally made it clear that if someone bothered her, she could ask for help. Evie was embarrassed and nodded with a grateful smile, realizing that her protectors were always nearby. But then the young lady was taken aback when a multitude of girls gathered around her, eager to get to the young lord. They rushed towards him, not noticing the humble orphan, pushing her aside and ignoring Evie's presence. She was stunned and confused as she watched the crowd sweep her out of the way, leaving no time for gratitude. For a few moments, she stood there in bewilderment, trying to understand why there was so much attention and admiration around these young people. Evie sighed heavily, knowing it was best to walk away, but she knew she could truly thank them later. Arsel, meanwhile, did not take his eyes off her, amazed at her youth and tenacity, and did not regret that he had lost the opportunity to talk. After all, despite her orphan origins, the girl passed her final exam with excellent grades, proving her talent. The young lady became the youngest student ever accepted into the academy, which was impressive in itself. After some time, both young men found a quiet place, sighing with relief and preparing to have a quiet lunch. But as soon as they sat down, other young people approached them and asked if they could join the meal. Arsel politely declined, explaining that they preferred privacy and maintaining personal space. Ruska looked at his friend with bewilderment, considering the refusal too harsh and impolite toward the others. Arsel firmly stated that next time he would deal with them personally, maintaining discipline and order. A moment later, the young man explained that he had been watching the girl and wanted to make sure she was comfortable. Evie approached the girls, cautiously asking if she could sit next to them, since there were no other free seats left. The girls immediately rejected her, not wanting the orphan to join them, and left her alone. Ruska noticed her confusion, and, meeting her gaze, was taken aback for a moment, realizing her stubbornness. Without taking his eyes off the young lady, who was still heading towards them with determination, Evie ran up with a smile, expressing gratitude for the help. But Arsel only smiled softly, considering gratitude unnecessary. She cautiously asked if she could sit next to him, and Arsel confirmed this with a smile. But then his friend interrupted him. Ruska, smiling, said that it wasn't the best idea, apologizing and suggesting they meet later for a quiet meal. Evie nodded understandingly, accepting the refusal, and felt relieved by such an honest and polite response. Ruska was pleased to note how Arcel handled the rejection, leaving the impression of a confident and fair friend. Arcel stood up, looking sternly at his friend, showing that in such situations one could not count on him. The young man was amazed, because his friend showed sternness and politeness at the same time, leaving him confused. Then the young lady took a sandwich and went outside. Realizing that tomorrow she would have to come to the cafeteria very early or late, she wandered through the garden, trying to find a secluded place to eat, enjoying the silence and the sense of nature. In the distance, her gaze was drawn to unusual flowers, and she caught their subtle fragrance in surprise, wondering about the location of the garden. Comparing the map of the academy, she realized that the garden most likely belonged to the palace, and she dreamed of seeing it in all its glory. Her joy was limited by time, because there were still many minutes left before dinner, and she wanted to return before curfew. Evie knew there could be trouble if anyone noticed her here, but a quiet look and caution allowed her to explore the area a little. She decided to sneak in quietly, trying to remain unnoticed and enjoy the quiet walk among the greenery. A moment later, she crawled out of the thick bushes, revealing a small patch of garden in front of her. But then she was taken aback, noticing in front of her rows of graves that were not mentioned in the Academy's reference books. Evie froze, realizing that she had found herself in an unexpected and almost mysterious place, full of floral scent. She cautiously approached closer, realizing that the scent of flowers came from the graves, and anxiety mixed with curiosity. The girl knew she had to be careful, or she would get into trouble, and she wanted to leave as quickly as possible. But her attention was drawn to one of the stoves, which looked neglected and in need of attention. A few minutes later, Evie was taken aback, realizing that she had unknowingly tidied up the graves, as if the habit of cleaning had just developed on its own. Previously, at the shelter, she earned her living by cleaning. She sighed heavily, realizing it was time to leave. But another movement caught her attention. At this time, the man slowly approached the graves, taking his time and carefully examining the space. He froze, noticing the fresh flowers, and looked around the place suspiciously, trying to figure out who was next to the grave. A moment later, he saw the sleeping girl and moved closer to get a better look at her. He noticed a sweet young lady sleeping quietly among the graves, who could not go unnoticed. Late in the evening, the emperor looked sternly at the aristocrats, his eyes sparkling with anger, because he could not understand how anyone dared to doubt the resting place of his wife and daughter. The man timidly apologized and explained that without the imperial blessing, their names could not be included in the family tree, and therefore they were denied access to the imperial tomb. The emperor was overcome with a furious surge of emotion, for the absurdity of these words was obvious, and everyone knew why his wife had not received the blessing of the late emperor. The man added that his wife was forced to accept a marriage arranged by the previous emperor, and without his blessing, she was considered an outsider, no different from strangers. These words deeply struck the emperor. His anger spread through his body, causing his fists to clench and his heart to beat wildly with uncontrollable rage. At that very moment, the emperor announced that, thanks to the entire situation in the hall, he had come up with a brilliant idea that could completely change the usual order of things. He decided that there was no need for his wife and daughter to rest in the tomb, since he would now determine their resting place himself. The emperor decided to keep them close to him, and the forest on the palace grounds seemed to him an ideal, quiet, and picturesque place for eternal peace. Everyone present was taken aback, not expecting such an unusual decision, since such a case had never happened before in the history of the empire. The noise caused by surprise and bewilderment only irritated the emperor, strengthening his determination to carry out his plan to the end. At that very moment, the emperor sternly declared that he would consider anyone who raised their voice to be a violator of the imperial order and would personally throw them out of the palace. He had not visited the graves of his relatives for a long time, and a longing had accumulated in his heart, mixed with a heavy feeling of guilt and loss. At first, he wanted to start cleaning the gravestones himself, but after a moment, he changed his mind, realizing that he could not cope with it alone. While observing the graves, the emperor noticed that someone had recently tidied them up. He couldn't understand who had dared to do such a thing until his gaze fell on the little girl. The emperor stared at the sleeping girl for a moment, amazed by her courage and the unusual nature of the situation. A few moments later, the young lady opened her eyes, still sleepy, with a slight confusion in her gaze and timid anxiety on her face. He studied the girl with bewilderment and caution, trying to understand how she could have ended up in such a place, far from all prying eyes. At that very moment, the young lady screamed, remembering the curfew, and completely forgot to answer the emperor's question, becoming confused and sighing. She did not know what to do and timidly asked for forgiveness, asking the man if he could tell her what time it was. The emperor responded with surprise. Evie let out a sigh of relief, realizing she still had a little time before curfew ended, and her heart calmed for a moment. But soon, she turned to the man, calling him uncle, and curiously asked who he was, causing the emperor genuine shock and confusion. The emperor realized that the girl had not even guessed who was standing before her. She smiled and timidly suggested that perhaps he was a professor at the academy. The emperor froze for a moment, taken aback by the question, and then quietly stated that he was a professor, and his name was Sion Rosen, as if repeating this truth to himself. At that very moment, the young lady greeted the emperor with a slight smile, introduced herself, and happily announced that she had been accepted into the academy, beaming with excitement. The emperor froze again, and at that moment the memories of his wife's words softly filled his mind, like a gentle whisper from the past. The lady smiled and said that if they had a girl, she would have her father's hair and her mother's green eyes, as if bringing to life a dream about the future. The emperor admitted to himself with a quiet smile that he would like their daughter to look like his wife, because he had never seen such beauty in her hair and eyes. The lady added with a soft smile that she simply knew that their child would be born with golden hair and green eyes, as if fate had already written this image. She looked closely at her husband and softly said that they would have a very beautiful girl who would look like her father, like a dream come true. The emperor thought, imagining if his daughter had survived, whether she would have become like the sweet girl who stood before him, touching his heart. At that very moment, he drove all useless thoughts away, remembering how he buried his child and his wife with his own hands, feeling the bitterness of loss. The emperor firmly stated that there was no reason for a student of the Academy of Gifted People to wander so deep into the Imperial Palace, as the rules had to be followed. He looked closely at the girl, assessing her courage and curiosity, and with slight anxiety asked why she had come to such a place. He sighed heavily, trying to understand her intentions, and asked if she even knew where she was, realizing his responsibility for her safety. Evie was taken aback, feeling the scent of flowers beckoning her, and timidly admitted that it was this smell that attracted her to such an unusual place. Then she drooped, sheepishly asked for forgiveness, and quietly asked if visiting such places was really prohibited. The emperor sighed heavily as he watched the girl, realizing how her disappointment was reflected on her face, like a thin crack in her fragile resolve. He came a little closer and declared that a child wandering alone never bodes well, warning of possible danger. Especially on the grounds of the royal palace, such an unauthorized foray was highly undesirable, and the young lady froze for a moment, confused and not knowing what to answer. But a moment later, she gathered her courage, thanked the man, and assured him that she would certainly take his words to heart and be careful. For a moment, it seemed to her as if it was a warm and gentle touch, like a memory of her father's care and affection, evoking a slight feeling of comfort and security. But a moment later, she came to her senses, shook herself, and timidly asked what time it was, so as not to be late and not to break the rules of the academy. The emperor cautiously asked if she would be able to get to the academy on her own, adding that he was ready to accompany her if help was needed. Evie smiled, bowed slightly, and assured him that everything was fine and that she would calmly go back the way she had come, not wanting to cause any trouble. A moment later, the young lady headed towards the bushes and carefully began to crawl, trying to return to the academy the same way, leaving the emperor in slight confusion. At that very moment, she turned to the emperor and with a gentle smile asked him to remember her name, as if wanting to leave a mark on the memory of the great man. The emperor was momentarily taken aback, not expecting such a bold and at the same time touching act from such a young girl. For some time, he watched her retreating figure intently, struck at once by her courage and innocent determination. To his regret, the emperor still felt weak in the face of children of such an age, unable to remain strict in the face of their sincerity. He quietly reflected that if his daughter had lived, she would probably have grown up to be just as determined and charming. A moment later, his attention was drawn to a small handkerchief lying neatly next to the tombstone, a reminder of the young lady's care. Evie, in turn, quickly ran to the dorm, almost out of breath, trying not to be late and not to break the rules. The girl expected to be reproached for the delay, but she sighed with relief, noticing that the lady did not show any displeasure. As soon as Evie took a few steps, she suddenly froze on the stairs, feeling slightly uneasy and confused. At that very moment, the girl opened her bag, hastily rummaging through her things in search of a familiar handkerchief. But a moment later, she realized that she had left her scarf behind while cleaning the gravestones, and her slight excitement gave way to surprise. Evie was puzzled, because this was the first thing she received from the academy, and now it seemed especially valuable. A moment later, the girl calmed down, realizing that the scarf could become a reason for meeting with the professor, and this caused a slight smile. Evie firmly decided that tomorrow she would definitely find out from one of the staff where the professor's laboratory was located in order to take advantage of the opportunity. As soon as Evie entered the room, she instantly froze, noticing a crowd of girls standing and looking at each other. All the ladies present started whispering when they saw Irene's roommate, and Evie didn't understand what was going on, since it was her room. A moment later, one of the ladies approached the girl and began asking about her life, emphasizing that she knew perfectly well that Evie was from an orphanage. The other girls whispered among themselves, surprised that the academy had accepted such a girl, since she looked unkempt and without new clothes. Evie was a little puzzled, because she had just returned from the forest and had changed her dress a little, hoping to look decent. As soon as Evie looked up, she instantly froze, struck by the girl's beauty, as if a real princess appeared before her. Before her eyes stood the most graceful and charming of all the girls she had ever seen at the academy. Meanwhile, the other young ladies were whispering among themselves, discussing that their friend had clearly gotten a roommate who was not up to their expectations. At that very moment, Irene sternly ordered everyone to be silent and slowly walk towards her new neighbor, demonstrating confidence and authority. A moment later, she walked up to Evie and looked at her menacingly, as if assessing every detail of her appearance and posture. Irene sighed heavily, stating that the situation was simply terrible, and Evie was confused, not understanding what exactly her words were referring to. Looking at the young lady, Irene noted her skinny figure, tangled hair, and pale skin, demonstrating a stern assessment of her appearance. She asked menacingly if the children in the orphanage where Evie lived were really starved, as if she wanted to emphasize the harsh reality of her past. Evie stood frozen in shock, shocked by the harshness of the words, and never expected to hear such accusations directed at her. Evie couldn't help but cry out that it wasn't true. A fire flared up in her chest, and she didn't care what others thought about the orphan. But when they dared to criticize her beloved headmistress, the girl screamed furiously, declaring that she was always kind and caring and would never betray. Everyone froze for a moment, amazed by the courage of the young orphan. No one expected that such a small creature would dare to argue with them. The crowd soon pounced on Evie, not understanding how she could dare to raise her voice in front of the older and noble students. The girls shouted that the orphan should have at least some manners, repeating that commoners had no place among their refined academy. They demanded an immediate apology from the young lady, hoping to pacify the disobedient girl, but her eyes shone with protest and stubbornness. Irene calmly stopped the angry girls. Her gaze was as hard as steel, and no one dared to contradict her decision. She sighed heavily and declared that the air in the room was stuffy and that she needed to go out for a while to come to her senses and rest. The young ladies smiled encouragingly and promised to accompany her like little shadows, creating a light and friendly accompaniment. Irene walked forward slowly, feeling the attention of sparkling eyes, while her companions cheerfully distracted her from the tension of the room. As she passed by, one of the ladies lightly nudged Evie, and the soft blow made the girl frown, but she chose to remain silent, holding back her emotions. Evie frowned at the crowd, her gaze sharp and unreadable, silent as if waiting for what would happen next. A few moments later, the young lady turned her attention to her neighbor. Her eyes met Evie's, but she did not say a word, keeping the secret. Evie froze, staring at her neighbor, her heart beating slightly faster. She didn't understand why that look seemed so penetrating. The next morning, Evie was happily getting ready, her eyes shining at the sight of her graceful form, not believing that she would be wearing such beauty every day. But a glance at her watch instantly cooled her joy. Time had crept up unnoticed, and she realized that she was late. Her heart sank with anxiety. Evie quietly left the room, sliding carefully across the floor, and noticed that her neighbor had still not left the bed, wrapped in silence. The girl wondered if her neighbor was really asleep. Her past behavior surfaced in her memory, and Evie realized she wasn't mean at all. Still, the young lady anxiously wondered what the expression on her neighbor's face meant last time, the quiet mystery of her gaze. Evie walked resolutely to the door, intending to make sure her neighbor was awake and find a reason to gently apologize for the possible misunderstanding. But before she could knock, a loud crash behind the door made her heart jump, anxiety suddenly squeezing her chest. Evie hurried to the door and opened it to find a group of girls standing in front of her, their eyes fixed on her with interest, and she timidly asked who they were. The young ladies looked at Evie with indifferent eyes, asking with a slight mockery why she was still staying in the room, whether she was really waiting for Irene. Timidly looking away, Evie quietly replied that this was not the case, and swore that she had no such intentions at all. The girls sternly warned them not to behave insolently. Irene was not someone to be spoken to without respect, as she was above all the aristocrats. They looked at Evie carefully, declaring that since she understood everything, it would be better to disappear, and they themselves would take care of the lady without making any mistakes. At that very moment, the young ladies roughly pushed Evie out of the room, and the door slammed shut behind her, leaving the girl in the silence of the corridor. Evie sighed heavily and realized that her neighbor had already made many friends, and she had to find her place in this new world again. Despite everything, the young lady quietly hoped that one day she would be able to greet her mysterious neighbor with a smile. Meanwhile, the girls whispered among themselves, amazed at the thought of how Lady Irene could share a room with a simple orphan. They suddenly fell silent as the faint creak of a door cut through the silence, causing their hearts to beat faster. They noticed the young lady and, joyfully running up, greeted her as if she were an old acquaintance, leaving their recent grievances behind. The girls immediately stated that there was no point in getting ready on her own on the first day, since they could easily help by sharing her worries. The lady added with a slight smile that some noble ladies used commoners from their neighbors as servants, so she could do the same. The girls understood that their daring act would hardly go unnoticed, because the young lady's neighbor was strong and rebellious. They had recently driven her away. Irene looked at them with icy severity. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she asked with haughty menace if they really dared to throw out their neighbor. The girl was taken aback, blushed, and timidly admitted that it was true, because the neighbor seemed not to know her place, causing a mixture of surprise and alarm in everyone. With pride and a smug grin, they declared that they had given her a good scolding and kicked her out, confident in their power and rightness, without thinking about the consequences. Irene held back her seething anger, having promised her sister to be patient, otherwise she would show them what she was capable of, and their confidence would melt away instantly. The lady, with a slight smile on her lips, timidly asked Irene what exactly she had said, since her words were almost unintelligible in the noise of the room. Irene turned away silently, her gaze stern and unwavering, then with cold determination declared that it was time for them to go downstairs without discussing anything further. The lovely ladies trembled, overcome with a mixture of fear and confusion, quietly wondering if they had done something truly wrong in this situation. A moment later, Madame, beaming with a smile, greeted all the children, her voice soft but full of energy, promising that the tour of the palace would soon begin. She emphasized that everyone should stay close to their partner to avoid getting lost among the majestic halls of the Imperial Palace. At that very moment, the young ladies noticed a little orphan standing nearby. Her frightened face immediately attracted attention and caused quiet whispers. They began to discuss the girl, whispering among themselves, their eyes sparkling with curiosity. Evie froze for a moment, not knowing what to expect from this strange scene. She turned around and looked intently at everyone present, feeling a strange tension in the air that seemed to squeeze her chest and stir her thoughts. But soon, all her doubts were dispelled when a sweet girl approached her with a warm smile and extended her hand in a welcoming manner, as if inviting her to be friends. Ramona Izelli greeted the young lady with a contented smile and timidly asked if they could walk together, giving her a feeling of light and sincere joy. Evie introduced herself with a joyful smile, her heart filled with warmth, and she happily agreed to go for a walk in the company of her new friend. Ramona looked closely at the girl and quietly said that living among aristocrats must not be easy, because she was also a commoner and understood this. She smiled and added that you couldn't tell it from her appearance, as if appearances could deceive everyone, hiding inner difficulties and experiences. Evie smiled back and admitted that she had understood everything immediately upon noticing the girl, and was glad that she had approached her first, showing courage. Ramona was taken aback, not expecting such sincerity, but soon laughed, accepting Evie's friendliness and openness, feeling a warm atmosphere of trust. At that very moment, she turned to her new acquaintance with a smile and declared that she would like to know something, showing genuine interest and friendliness. Ramona looked closely at her companion and asked curiously if she had been secretly adopted into some high-ranking house. She suggested that the girl might be the great lord's hidden child. Evie was taken aback, not understanding what her new acquaintance was talking about. Ramona smiled and declared that she didn't need to pretend. Everything was clear, as if an invisible thread connected their stories. With a sly grin, she asked if the emperor had personally chosen the girl, wanting to understand how she had managed to enter the academy. Evie hastened to object that the emperor had not chosen her, since she had never been to the capital and did not even know what he looked like. Ramona was surprised to hear this, because she already knew some things about the girl, and the thought of the secret made her heart beat faster. She didn't have time to finish speaking, when suddenly there was a noise, a light rumble of footsteps and whispers, interrupting their peace. Turning around, they saw young men, and behind them, a train of girls, following their every move with admiration and curiosity. Evie noticed that the young men were indeed popular, and she couldn't tell whether it was because of their beauty or something else. Ramona immediately declared that these young men were the prime candidates for the emperor's adoption, and this explained all the admiring noise around. Arcel revealed that the third son of the ducal house was a true genius from childhood, demonstrating outstanding abilities and repeatedly receiving audiences with the emperor. Ruska, the marquise's fourth son, was somewhat inferior to his friend in his studies, but his physical abilities were brilliant, promising him a magnificent future as a knight. Regardless of who became the crown prince, he was expected to marry a young lady from a wealthy southern house, binding the families together in an alliance. No one knew how life would turn out, so everyone fussed around the young people, watching their every step with curiosity and anxiety. The young lady noted with a smile that this was the reason everyone was running after the boys, and asked her companion if she understood the essence of what was happening. Evie smiled and stated that she knew that these young people were really very good, because she had already spoken to them in person several times. Ramona was surprised, because she did not expect such a casual conversation. It is not so easy to talk to them without embarrassment and nervousness. A moment later, the young lady noticed that the young man was heading towards her, and she greeted his gaze with a joyful smile. Ramona was taken aback, not understanding why the girl communicated with him so easily, and timidly asked for forgiveness, feeling slightly embarrassed. But the young man only smiled in response, which surprised Ramona even more with his goodwill and easy manner of greeting. Evie smiled and remarked that the uniform suited the boy very well, and he responded in kind, noting that it suited her too, causing a slight excitement. Evie, looking at her friend, said that next time she should also greet the young man in order to establish more confident communication. Ramona watched the girl with shining eyes, hoping that she would introduce her sooner, because she was eager to get to know the young man better. Evie looked at the young man with a smile and said that she wanted to introduce him to her friend, with a slight excitement in her voice and joy in her eyes. She said that she had recently met Ramona, but before she could finish speaking, the young man apologized, admitting his fatigue and the need to move on. He quickly turned and walked away, leaving both girls slightly confused and thoughtful, causing Evie a slight feeling of anxiety. Evie looked at her friend in confusion and admitted that the young man was clearly tired, while apologizing for not being able to introduce her in person. Ramona smiled softly and said that nothing terrible had happened, because they would still have the opportunity to talk with the young man. Ramona announced with a smile that it was time to return to her friends, gently saying goodbye to Evie and causing her to feel a slight sadness. The girl said goodbye to Ramona, and Evie was a little upset, but was already looking forward to future meetings and new opportunities for friendship. Ramona approached her friends with a soft smile and apologized for the delay, trying to hide the excitement caused by the recent conversation. Her friends immediately bombarded her with questions, wanting to know if it was true that the girl had been personally chosen by the emperor, and their voices rang with curiosity. Ramona, slightly taken aback, admitted that the information had been unclear and vague, and she was no longer confident in what she had heard. The girls looked at each other in surprise, not expecting such an answer, since they had already come to believe in the vivid and exciting version of events. They were at a loss, realizing that they had spread the rumor themselves, and now their words were losing their confidence, causing anxiety and awkwardness. Ramona added that Evie did not directly confirm the rumors, but her behavior seemed strange, as if she was actually hiding something. She also said that the Lord had spoken to the girl personally, and her friends perked up, assuring her that something interesting was waiting for them ahead. One of the girls looked closely at Ramona and apologized for her harshness, admitting that she had hastily accused her of lying. She admitted that she simply assumed that her friend had deliberately misled them, not wanting to share the truth. Ramona smiled calmly and made it clear that she would not act so dishonestly, maintaining confidence and dignity. Looking around at her friends, she acknowledged their doubts and hinted that she had already come up with a way to find out the truth for sure. With a slight but sly grin, Ramona declared that she would force the girl to confirm the rumors herself, leaving no room for doubt. After some time, the children arrived at the Imperial Palace for a tour, and the majestic walls evoked awe and delight. Evie was agitated and confused, as her height meant she could barely see anything, which made her feel a little anxious. Melody noted with a smile that the building looked older than it appeared, and that traces of the past war were still visible on it. The young man asked in surprise why these traces had not been removed, since the streets of the capital had long since been restored and were sparkling clean. Melody gently explained that it was the emperor's decision to help the common people first and then take care of the palace. She added that restoration funds were directed to the outer districts, leaving the palace as a memory of bygone times. Evie remembered how the headmistress at the orphanage had joyfully announced an increase in aid, and that day the children had plenty of food for the first time. The girl understood that without the emperor's decision, the orphanage would have been left without support longer than anyone else, and this thought warmed her heart. Evie mentally thanked the emperor, because thanks to him, the children were able to survive the harsh winter without losing hope. Suddenly, her gaze brightened when she noticed a familiar figure, and her heart skipped a beat with joy at the unexpected meeting. At this time, the emperor was in a meeting among his subordinates, where tension hung in the air, as if before a storm. He was irritated by the minister's inability to reach an agreement. Their disputes only increased his internal discontent. His stern gaze silenced the room, and he began to lecture those present until the silence became almost palpable. Soon he announced a break, wanting to step away from the difficult conversations and get his thoughts in order. He walked to the window, hoping to find peace in contemplating the courtyard, where life flowed differently, without the burden of decisions. But his attention was attracted by a small figure who was gesturing towards him, and that moment broke his usual restraint. Evie greeted him quietly but sincerely, her smile warm and bright, like a ray of sunshine through stone walls. She made it clear that she was glad to meet him, and her joy was genuine, which unexpectedly touched the emperor. The emperor remembered that children were visiting the palace today, and his gaze focused again on the girl. He noticed that she was significantly younger than the others, and wondered if she would be able to cope with the demands of the academy. He watched her silently for a moment, as if trying to understand what was hidden behind her naive smile. The idea of allowing her to visit the palace separately flashed through his mind. And then he could give her a tour himself, like an ordinary professor. He involuntarily raised his hand in response to her greeting, and a rare, almost forgotten soft smile appeared on his face. But he soon came to his senses when the minister asked a question, bringing him back to the reality of his strict duties. The emperor was at a loss and quickly replied that he had simply been distracted by the beetle, causing confusion among those present. A moment later, he returned to his seat, and the meeting continued as if nothing had happened. He listened to the reports, but his thoughts were still far away, returning to the unexpected meeting with the girl. The emperor realized that his justification looked awkward, and for the first time in a long time, he made a mistake in front of his subordinates. The prime minister looked at the emperor in surprise, because his behavior was unusual, and there was a hidden anxiety in it. At that moment, an awkward silence fell over the room, as if the space itself was awaiting an explanation that no one dared to give. The lady told the children with a smile that the palace contained not only the emperor's office, but also a magnificent banquet hall. A knight approached them and noted with surprise that he did not expect to see a tour from the academy here among such important walls. He introduced himself with a friendly smile, admitting that he was glad to meet such promising students of the academy. He addressed his nephew warmly, not hiding his joy at the unexpected meeting after a long time of separation. Evie watched the scene in amazement, realizing that her classmates had connections at the palace that were beyond her reach. She understood that with such connections, learning could really become easier and more enjoyable. For some time, she listened to the adults with admiration, not noticing that the other girls were watching her closely. Ramona understood that connections at court could completely change her life, making it brighter and safer. One of the girls asked her friend with a smile how their plan was going, hiding the impatience in her voice. She recalled that Ramona had promised to find out the truth about Evie's connection with the emperor, waiting for confirmation of the rumors. Ramona confidently assured them that everything was going according to plan, as the moment for the test was perfect. The girl added with a smile that there were a lot of people around, and right now everything should go as they planned. Ramona approached Evie and asked with a gentle smile if it was difficult for her to watch this, since she was under the protection of the emperor. Evie looked at her in confusion, not understanding the hint, and Ramona reminded her of the words about choosing the emperor. Ramona admitted that she envied her and asked if all of this was just fiction and empty words. Evie was confused because she had never said anything like this before, and her embarrassment only grew. At that moment, Melody approached them and reminded them that the tour needed to continue without delay. But then a knight appeared and addressed the lady sternly, clearly having heard their conversation and not wanting to leave it unattended. He stated that it was unacceptable to hide behind the name of the emperor, even if the words were spoken out of envy or frivolity. Evie tried to explain that she had said nothing of the sort, while Ramona watched what was happening with a satisfied grin. At that moment, the young man stepped forward and calmly spoke the truth, causing everyone around him to freeze in complete bewilderment. The knight was taken aback, recognizing the lord in front of him, and immediately changed his expression to respectful. Arcel calmly stated that Evie had indeed been personally chosen by the emperor, without raising his voice, but instilling confidence. He explained that she was accepted due to her outstanding results, despite her lowly origins, which almost became an obstacle. Arcel added that his father was the emperor's advisor and knew the details, after which he asked the knight a direct question. The knight apologized to Evie in confusion, realizing his mistake, and quickly left, citing urgent matters. Ramona froze in shock, realizing that everything she had heard earlier could have been true all along. She flinched when Arcel addressed her and felt her confidence rapidly fading. Arcel noted that Evie did not spread rumors and did not even know about the emperor's decision, emphasizing her innocence. He sternly asked why she had caused this misunderstanding, having nothing to do with what was happening, and his gaze was cold. The young man looked intently at the girl, as he wanted to get an answer. The girl was at a loss, not knowing what to answer, because the difference in their status weighed on her more than any words. She turned to her friends, hoping for support, but did not receive it, despite their previous confidence. She sheepishly admitted her mistake, claiming that it had all happened by accident and without malicious intent. Arcel coldly remarked that one should think before acting, and only then act, without making excuses. The girl felt an unbearable shame that she had never known before, and could not raise her eyes. She trembled as the others watched in silence as the lord walked away, maintaining his proud posture. Arcel himself thought that he had once again unwittingly helped Evie, without even planning it in advance. He looked back, expecting her to come over to thank him again, as she had before, but, noticing her expression, he was suddenly taken aback, unable to immediately understand what was hidden behind her gaze. Meanwhile, Evie was glad that the emperor had actually chosen her, and this filled her heart with light. She was afraid of being punished for lying, but now she felt relieved, knowing that she could stay at the academy. Ramona looked at her with irritation, not understanding why she looked happy after everything that had happened. The thought that Evie was happy because of the Lord's intervention tormented her, and this only increased her inner anger. Ramona's friends approached her and asked if she was okay, trying to support her after the awkward scene. They assured her with smiles that she was right, but there was uncertainty and confusion in their voices. The girls did not understand why the Lord sided with the orphan, and this caused hidden discontent in them. They were irritated by the thought that such a noble man supported a simple girl whom they considered unworthy. Ramona, having listened to everything, with a sly smile called her friends closer, because she had already come up with a new, much more insidious plan. After some time, Melody, with a gentle smile, informed the children that their tour was coming to an end, as many of the halls were closed, but new visits to the palace still awaited them. She calmly explained that they could now look around a bit on their own, and that later they should meet in the main square. And Evie was at a loss, not knowing where to start in such a huge place. A moment later, Evie was taken aback by the girls' animated whispers, which rang with hidden excitement, as if they were discussing something forbidden and attractive. She listened, and soon realized that they were talking about a portrait of the emperor himself, and this news flared up in her heart like a bright spark of sincere interest. For a while, she looked at her classmates in surprise, feeling a growing desire in her soul to follow them and see the one to whom she owed her destiny. Meanwhile, the girls looked at each other with sly smiles, enjoying how easily they had managed to lure the naive Evie into their quiet but thoughtful game. Evie followed them with pure joy, because in her heart there lived a warm gratitude to the emperor, thanks to whom her life had changed forever. She sincerely longed to see his face, but, approaching the gallery of portraits, she was suddenly taken aback, as if her anticipation had met with quiet disappointment. In front of her was an empty space where the portrait should have hung, and she realized that it had been removed due to renovations, leaving only a cold emptiness. She understood that it would be a shame to leave, and so she decided to look around the palace, hoping to find in it at least a fraction of the admiration for which she came. She noticed that the portraits had no nameplates, but she still felt a quiet joy, because even this place seemed amazing and special to her. Soon, her gaze fell on the image of a girl about her age, and there was something strangely attractive and warm about the portrait. But a moment later, she froze, seeing another portrait, so beautiful that her heart involuntarily trembled with unexpected admiration. For some time, she could not take her eyes off the majestic image, struck by its beauty, because she had never seen anything like it before. Evie couldn't take her eyes off the beautiful woman in the portrait, and her heart sank with admiration, as if in front of her was not paint on a canvas, but a living soul. But a moment later, she woke up from her dreams and suddenly felt the hall plunge into a strange silence, cold and unfamiliar, as if time had stopped. In her haste, she turned around and realized with alarm that there was no one around anymore, and this sudden loneliness made her heart clench painfully. Evie hurried to the door, aware that the time to gather was approaching, and a slight panic pushed her to walk faster through the empty and silent hall. But as soon as she touched the handle, she was taken aback to find that the door was locked, and at that moment, an anxious and oppressive feeling flared up in her soul. For a moment, the young lady stood quietly by the closed door, gradually realizing her situation, and anxiety slowly spread through her soul in cold, heavy waves. Meanwhile, Irene was calmly waiting for her friend outside, but a slight shadow of anxiety was already beginning to flicker in her gaze, barely noticeable to those around her. She was taken aback when Madame suddenly called all the children together, and at that moment a vague feeling arose in her heart that something had gone wrong. Melody announced with a soft smile that it was time for them to return to the dorm, but at that very moment, Irene called out to her, disrupting the calm flow of events. She looked at Melody with concern and admitted that she had not seen her neighbor, and there was a note of alarm in her voice that she could no longer hide. Melody looked at the girl with slight bewilderment, and then Irene described her neighbor in detail, trying to convey every detail of her appearance. When she finished, she added that she was very small and cute, and Melody was suddenly taken aback, realizing that she knew perfectly well who she was talking about. The lady felt a growing sense of uneasiness, as the realization that the child was left alone in the palace cast a heavy shadow over her thoughts and gave the situation a frightening seriousness. A moment later, she was taken aback by the minister's voice, which sounded unexpected and sharp, as if it had broken the tense silence that had fallen between those present. The man came closer and asked in a reserved tone what had happened, as he had noticed the commotion around him and understood that something alarming was hidden behind it. Melody told him in detail what had happened, and with each word, the atmosphere became heavier, as if the situation itself was weighing on everyone with its inevitability. The man looked around at everyone present with a puzzled expression and asked if no one knew where the girl was now, and there was obvious concern in his voice. The lady, barely containing her anxiety, asked if they really had no other choice but to wait until the morning, hoping that the girl could be found safely. The minister, with a heavy sigh, recalled that terrible incident during the War for the Throne, which left the emperor without anything and was forever imprinted in the memory of the people. He added that after those tragic events, the emperor severely tightened the palace curfew to ensure that such a thing never happened again. The man noted with a concerned look that they could not freely search the palace, especially when the child's exact location remained unknown. He looked closely at everyone present, warning that if the girl was discovered, she would face severe punishment, and an uneasy silence fell over the room. Melody sighed heavily and stated that the search would begin at dawn with the academy staff, hoping that nothing would happen to the girl. She immediately called all the students because it was time to return to the dormitory, leaving the worry about the missing girl in their hearts. At this time, the young lady was pounding her fists on the door, screaming for help, longing for someone to come and open it. Evie was puzzled and filled with anxiety. Why was she locked in this strange and unfamiliar place? With a heavy sigh, she tried to calm down, deciding that rescue would not be long in coming, since the guide had already noticed her absence. But a moment later, her attention was caught by an unexpected sound that made the young lady's heart stop. Evie turned around and froze. The portraits seemed to have come to life and were looking straight at her, causing a shiver to run through her entire body. She realized that as darkness fell, these images became eerie and threatening. Evie realized that she urgently needed to find a place bathed in at least weak moonlight. She hurried to the better-lit side of the hall, hoping to sit down there and wait for rescue. Sitting down on the cold floor, the young lady realized that she did not need to look at the frightening portraits, but her gaze involuntarily slid to a portrait nearby, awakening mixed feelings of fear and curiosity. She couldn't take her eyes off the exquisite portrait, where the young girl shone with beauty, and this image didn't seem scary to her at all. Evie knew she had to sit quietly and wait, hoping deep down that she would be found and saved. The young lady felt a piercing cold, but she knew for sure that she couldn't give up and needed to remain patient in this situation. That same evening, Ruska approached his friend with excitement and asked if he had heard the latest news from the palace. He looked intently at his comrade and told in detail what exactly had happened to the girl within the palace walls. Arcel asked excitedly if the palace staff had begun searching, fearing that the girl might be in danger. But his friend only calmly replied that during curfew, palace staff were not allowed to enter inside. Looking at his friend, he sighed heavily and said that the staff would begin searching only in the morning, and this alarmed the Lord. The girl was small and fragile. Arcel looked closely at his comrade and emphasized that they had special passes to enter the Imperial Palace. Ruska was surprised and asked what exactly he meant, and listened with excitement to the further plan. Arcel seriously stated that they should go together to personally find the girl among the palace halls. A moment later, both young men resolutely set out to search, although Ruska constantly repeated that it would be difficult for the two of them to cope. He was overcome with fear and excitement because the palace seemed endless, and Arcel, looking around the castle, suggested to his friend to continue the search, hoping that the girl was somewhere nearby. But soon the young men were taken aback when they heard a sudden male voice that cut through the silence of the huge hall. Ruska was literally scared to death, not knowing what to do or how to get out of it, but Arcel calmly advised him to calm down and tell the truth. At that very moment, the man introduced himself and stated that they had special passes to the palace, which gave them the right to be inside. The young men stood quietly, tense, wondering if their cautious excuse had worked, or if things would turn out badly. At that very moment, the man sternly stated that the pass he had issued was not intended for such actions and violations. The young man was taken aback, not seeing the man's face, but he instantly recognized the familiar voice, and a shudder ran through his body. A moment later, the emperor took a step, and now the young people clearly saw his majestic face, full of severity. The emperor stated with cold confidence that they knew the rules, and if they broke the curfew again, their passes would be revoked by him personally. At that very moment, the young men bowed humbly and sincerely asked for forgiveness. Feeling the full gravity of the situation, he took a deep breath and quietly stated that if they realized what they had done, that was enough. And knowing their character, something like this would not happen again. Then the emperor looked closely at the young people and asked what had brought them to the palace at such a late hour. Arcel immediately replied that the academy student had gone missing in the palace, and they had come to look for her. With concern in his voice, Arcel, looking straight at the emperor, clarified the girl's name, Evi. And at that very moment, the emperor almost shuddered from the familiar sound. He remembered the young lady he had recently met and wondered with bewilderment. Could such a tiny and fragile girl really have gotten lost among the palace halls? The emperor realized that the palace was huge, and it was impossible to control every hidden corner where the young lady might be. At the same time, he understood that the main difficulty lay not in the size of the palace, but in the magic that guarded the chambers. As soon as the protective magic was activated, many guards abandoned their posts, and now there was a catastrophic lack of forces to search for the girl. At that moment, the emperor firmly declared that the young men must return to the dormitory, ignoring their protests and despair. The young men disagreed, as the girl was the youngest in the academy, but it became clear to them that it was impossible to convince him. Then the emperor calmly stated that there was no need to worry, because he would call Seraphina to find the girl. The young people froze in shock. Imperial mage Seraphina Lidum was a true genius who shone in magic since the Academy of Gifted People and never gave up her lead. She was known as the most powerful mage in the world and held the position of Dean of the Academy, while also being the Emperor's closest confidant. Irene was surprised to realize that the Emperor was going to use someone like her, since activating magic in the palace was strictly prohibited. He understood that if the great Emperor broke the rules, the trust in the Imperial family could be shattered at the seams, and this threatened a major scandal. He realized that this was a colossal risk for the Emperor, but he was still ready to sacrifice everything for the fate of one child, and the young man eagerly sought an answer to the plan. A moment later, Seraphina cried out in surprise. The Emperor was demanding that she cast a tracking spell throughout the palace. She was worried that something irreversible had happened, but the Emperor only calmly informed her that the child was missing, causing her heart to stop. Seraphina froze like a stone statue, overcome with shock. She had not expected such an order at all, and her heart was pounding wildly. The Emperor explained that a student from the academy had gone missing during an excursion, and he wanted her to use magic to find her. As no one knew her exact location, Seraphina was shocked. She understood that if the ministers learned of the Emperor's violation of the rules, the discontent would be enormous and the consequences serious. She looked closely at the Emperor, wondering if there was something hidden in this incident that she had not known about until now. But at the same time, Seraphina realized that she might never have the chance to use such powerful magic in the palace again in her life. A moment later, she discovered a magical stone that perfectly matched her unique frequency, and her heart skipped a beat in delight. With a smile, Seraphina noted that there were too many factors in the palace that interfered with magic, and every corner seemed to resist its power. Smiling softly, she thought that if her best friend could help, like in the good old days, everything would go much easier. A moment later, Seraphina realized that she had said too much, and her heart sank, anticipating the Emperor's harsh reaction. The Emperor looked at her with cold severity, making Seraphina feel the weight of his words and the responsibility for each of them. She was at a loss, not knowing how to answer, realizing that it was no longer possible to hide the truth, even because of her closeness to the Emperor's wife. Seraphina admitted that his wife was incredibly special, and that being with her made her friend's magic stronger and more resilient. She became thoughtful, realizing that her powers were greatly increased in the presence of the Emperor's wife, which stunned the Emperor, who learned of this for the first time. Seraphina explained that it was important for the Emperor's wife to hide this fact, since she herself did not understand the nature of her magic and how to use it. Seraphina looked at the Emperor with alarm, sensing his anger, and her heart sank with fear and responsibility. She quickly focused on finding the child, trying to change the subject and refocus attention on the case. As she ran away, Seraphina felt relieved that the conversation was over, and prepared to prepare everything necessary for the search. At this time, the young lady sat quietly in the dark room, feeling cold and hungry, her thoughts full of anxiety and uncertainty. Evie didn't understand why it was so hard to endure, because what was happening seemed like a trifle compared to previous trials. She remembered Madame's voice, which forced her to go to the stables and do hard work, feeling both irritation and shame. The men watched in horror as the little girl was just learning to walk, and the woman was already forcing her to do hard work, justifying it by saying she needed to work to pay for her living expenses. Evie found these tasks difficult, but she understood that if she didn't complete them in time, she would be left without food and the shelter's protection. In the first minutes of work, the girl tripped and fell with a crash into a pile of manure, feeling both pain and shame. Returning to the house, she felt the disapproving gaze of her hostess and the vague smell of her failure, which remained with her for some time. However, a moment later, the young lady did receive her modest supper, for which she was deeply grateful. For most people, life in the shelter seemed hard and unfair, but for Evie, the shelter remained a true paradise, a place of safety and warmth. Evie didn't have to work all day, and food was brought to her 3 times a day exactly on schedule, which gave her a sense of order and care. The food was not stale or raw, but warm and prepared with care, making each meal a true little feast. The girl realized that meetings with the director were a rare gift of fate, behind which lay true care and support. But suddenly, all her thoughts disappeared when she felt something strange and unusual that instantly caught her attention. She reached for the window, hearing a crash, and at the same time saw a bright light that illuminated everything around with unexpected power. Evie walked slowly to the window, enchanted by the view that captivated her heart, mixing delight with a slight fear. Evie felt a slight thrill and fear as the strange objects reached out to her, causing anxiety and the unknown. The girl had never experienced anything like this before, and it made her tremble with fear, as if every sound increased the tension. Touching the beautiful portrait, she felt as if an invisible force was comforting her, whispering that she needed to be patient a little, because they were looking for her. Evie turned and looked closely at the portrait, feeling the warmth emanating from it, gently warming and soothing. Evie's excitement increased when she thought she heard a soft, pleasant voice coming from the portrait, like a quiet whisper of hope. The voice was gentle and soothing, giving the young lady confidence that everything would certainly end well and she was safe. Feeling this warmth and support, Evie felt a surge of determination and hurried towards the bright light, as if it was beckoning her to salvation. Meanwhile, the sorceress searched tirelessly for the young girl, concentrating all her strength and attention, as if every second was crucial. A moment later, she felt a response and realized that the girl was in a gallery of portraits, where magic subtly responded to her search. At that moment, Evie flinched as she heard distant screams echoing throughout the hall, breaking the oppressive silence. The sorceress burst into the room where the girl was, and her appearance illuminated the space with determination and strength. Evie looked at the woman with confusion, hoping that she had come for her, and felt guilty for breaking away from the group. Serafina quickly picked up the girl, amazed at how such a small and fragile little thing could get lost in the huge castle. She quickly examined the child, noticing with alarm the faint heat and cold that had enveloped her, realizing how dangerous this night could become. She bombarded the girl with questions, and Evie, confused, tried to grasp the meaning, asking her to speak more slowly because the words merged into an anxious stream. At that very moment, shouts were heard, and Anna, hearing the dean being addressed, realized with horror that she had made a serious mistake. Serafina sighed heavily, looking at the girl, and decided that first they would return to the academy, and the conversations could be postponed. Evie looked at the dean in amazement, because from the brochures, she had expected to see a much more mature and stern woman, and not such a youthful figure. Serafina, looking around at everyone present, decided that everything important would be discussed later, but now they needed to go back and rest. At that moment, her gaze fell on the young lady, a mixture of anxiety, relief, and a barely noticeable softness. Serafina understood that their success was no accident, because the girl seemed to be under her friend's invisible blessing, and the magic responded faster than usual. Meanwhile, the Emperor stood quietly behind the door, listening to the conversation, hiding in the shadows, as if not wanting to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. He breathed a sigh of relief when he realized that the girl had been found, and the weight of anxiety that had been squeezing his heart finally began to recede. The Emperor was sincerely glad that she was okay, but still did not dare to show himself to her, remaining on the sidelines. After some time, the young sorceress looked at the young people with bewilderment, trying to understand their expressions and hidden emotions. They were glad that the girl had been found, and their faces lit up with relief, as if the tension of the last hours had finally dissipated. However, despite their joy, they couldn't help but notice that she looked pale and tired, which caused them a quiet concern. Evie looked at the young men with genuine surprise, not expecting them to worry about her and risk going on a search at such a dangerous time. Serafina explained with a slight smile that the young men had entered the palace after curfew for her sake, almost letting slip about their meeting with the Emperor. At that moment, she stopped short, remembering the request to keep the Emperor's participation a secret. An alarm flared up inside her at her own carelessness. Momentarily confused, Serafina froze, trying to find a way out of the situation without giving away too much. Serafina quickly explained that the young men had met her on her way back from her meeting with the Emperor, trying to hide the true details. Evie thanked them with a warm smile for their care and help, as she had already begun to think that she would spend the night in the cold halls of the palace. One of the young men approached his friend, wanting to clarify an important point, and she looked at him in bewilderment, not understanding the reason for the question. Arcel looked at her thoughtfully, trying to understand how she had ended up locked in the palace, and involuntarily assumed someone had interfered. The young lady was at a loss, not knowing how to answer such a direct question, and only silently tried to sort out her own thoughts. Lost in thought, she noted the girl's strange behavior, but did not dare to accuse without evidence, holding back doubts in the depths of her soul. She assumed that what had happened could only have been a consequence of her confusion, because her thoughts were confused and her attention easily eluded her. Evie explained with a gentle smile that she had become engrossed in the paintings and lost track of time, which is why she had found herself locked in the empty room. Serafina looked at her carefully and noticed her swollen hand, deciding that the wound needed to be treated immediately. Soon they sat in silence as Serafina carefully bandaged her arm, a sense of calm in the air after the ordeal. When she finished, she looked over her work with a slight smile, feeling a quiet satisfaction and confidence that the girl was safe. Evie looked closely at the dean and bowed her head with sincere gratitude, feeling a warm sense of relief after what she had experienced. A moment later, the young lady said goodbye to her saviors with a soft smile and headed back to the dorm, feeling tired. Arcel turned thoughtfully to the dean, trying to understand whether what had happened was truly a simple accident or whether there was something more behind it. Serafina sighed heavily, making it clear that what had happened was no accident, and her gaze reflected the seriousness of the situation. She looked closely at the Lord, deciding to begin searching for the culprit in the morning, realizing that this incident would require strict measures and investigation. After some time, the young lady quietly returned to her room, trying not to attract attention and hide the traces of the excitement she had experienced. Evie was excited because the day had been long and eventful, full of worries and events, and now she only dreamed of washing up and falling asleep. But her gaze fell on the table where the sandwiches lay, and the water stood, like a quiet sign of care amidst the chaos they had experienced. The young lady wondered if the teacher had left this food for her, and a warm feeling of gratitude flared up in her heart. She began to eat, realizing that she must definitely thank him for this unexpected kindness that warmed her soul after a hard day. Meanwhile, her neighbor watched her with a slight, satisfied smile, as if enjoying how the girl was satisfying her hunger after what she had experienced. Ruska had a hard time suppressing a yawn, feeling that lack of sleep was weakening his body. The late-night invitation to go to the Imperial Palace had left a trace of fatigue and irritation. Arcel calmly stated that it was not his fault, as he himself had spent the whole night playing the game instead of sleeping, and this habit only added fuel to the conflict between them. The young man was seething with rage, not understanding why his friend always had the last word, as if the whole world was against him. Arcel looked intently at his comrade and demanded that he be silent, while Ruska, with incomprehension in his eyes, tried to understand the reason for such stern words. Meanwhile, the young ladies whispered quietly, not knowing what to do next, since the girl had returned safe and sound, and the consequences could be serious. They were worried that the orphan would tell on them, and then they would have to face punishment and shame, as if the shadows of their pranks had come to life around them. The young lady was taken aback when she heard the Lord's voice. His soft tone and calm confidence instantly caught her attention and caused a slight excitement. He looked at the girls with a gentle smile, and they felt both warmth and anxiety, as if a new, incomprehensible world was opening up before them. The girls blossomed with happiness and shyly asked him to sit down, feeling a strange, trembling excitement that mixed with joy. The Lord thanked them with a slight smile, and a quiet harmony hung in the room as fears and worries retreated for a moment. Arcel sighed heavily, thinking over the commotion, and realized that everyone involved in the events were surprised and slightly stunned by what had happened. The Lord regretted that the events had not remained in the shadows, because now that the dean was aware of it, the situation had taken a serious turn and worried him with its scale. The girls were excited, excitement mixed with curiosity, because they wanted to know what awaited the guilty, and the fear of punishment squeezed their hearts. Arcel sighed heavily, realizing that excluding both the aristocrats and the orphans at the same time was absurd, and his desire to help the girls seemed like the only right decision. They stood in awkward silence, feeling the unpredictability of the situation. Every glance and word of the Lord seemed important, and at the same time alarming to them. Arcel watched them closely, his gaze combining tenderness and determination, because he could protect the girls if they opened up and told everything they knew. Meanwhile, Ruska watched his friend with his mouth wide open, amazed by his unusual behavior, which was completely contrary to his usual nature. He understood that before him stood a two-faced schemer whose actions caused both fear and bewilderment, leaving Ruska in confusion and anxiety. A moment later, the young lady could not withstand the Lord's pressure, and with tears in her eyes, admitted that it was they who locked the girl in the room, feeling the weight of guilt. The friends, out of fear, tried to justify themselves, claiming that they had no intention of harming her and blaming their friend, who they said had set them up. The young lady was overcome with intense horror, realizing that severe punishment awaited her for what had happened, and her heart sank with fear. They shouted that Ramona had promised to immediately release the girl, claiming that it was all supposed to be just a little joke, without any serious consequences. Looking at the Lord with tears in their eyes, they admitted that everything had gone too far, and now they were scared, so they decided to open up and tell the truth. Then he sighed heavily, thanking them for their honesty, and the children asked him not to tell anyone that they were involved in this incident. He assured them with a gentle smile that he would keep the secret, promising to help them on behalf of his family, and the children felt relieved to hear these words. However, his face turned purple, and he declared that they must admit their guilt and sincerely apologize to the girl. Otherwise, the consequences would not slow down. If they didn't do this, he wouldn't keep quiet about their involvement, and the young ladies froze in place, overcome with shock and fear of justice. Ruska looked at his friend with a smile, realizing that he had figured out who was really guilty, and his friend sighed heavily and confirmed that he had suspected exactly one girl from the very beginning. Ruska curiously asked his friend what his intentions were now, and how he planned to act in the current situation. Arcel glanced sideways at Ruska, his gaze menacing, and asked him what he thought would happen next. He firmly stated that he was going to repay the girls in the same coin, confident in the justice of his intentions. Meanwhile, the young lady was chatting with her friends, engaging in light and carefree conversation, enjoying the moments of peace. But suddenly, she was taken aback by the young lord's voice, and her attention immediately turned to him. She looked at the Lord with bewilderment, realizing that he was asking her to step aside and talk alone, and she was internally preparing for the conversation. The young ladies whispered to each other as they watched the young lord approach them, marveling at the close connection his friend had with him. Ramona looked at the Lord with embarrassment and agreed to go with him alone, feeling a slight anxiety and excitement at the same time. She looked at him with a soft smile and asked what he wanted to talk about. Feeling a little curious, he assured that it was nothing serious. Lord explained that one of the staff members had found something she had lost, and so wanted to escort the girl to her room to retrieve it. The young lady thought that accompanying her would be troublesome for him, but the Lord assured her that he had offered it himself and was ready to take responsibility for her safe return. Ramona was embarrassed by his words, but a joyful smile lit up her face, and she readily agreed to follow him. As she walked along, she couldn't help but wonder what exactly she might have lost and why she was so confused by this minor incident. Ramona admitted to herself with a smile that she didn't usually lose things, and she felt a little embarrassed by her own forgetfulness. She tried to clarify whether the Lord had ever experienced something similar, but received a dry answer, and his gaze seemed cold and distant to her. Ramona decided to put her disturbing thoughts aside, realizing that she had simply imagined it. And at that very moment, the young lord announced that they had already arrived. Ursel opened the door to the staff room for her, with a slight smile, indicating that she could enter, and the young lady nodded to him gratefully. As she entered, Ramona froze for a moment, struck by the emptiness and darkness of the room, which seemed strangely lifeless. She turned hastily to the lord and declared that this room did not look like a staff quarters at all. Confusion and anxiety mixed in her voice. At that very moment, the door slammed shut right in front of her, and Ramona rushed towards it, begging the lord not to joke and to open the passage. Ursel watched her coldly and asked if she was familiar with this situation, hinting that confession would be wise for her safety. Ramona was taken aback and tried to explain that she had nothing to do with the incident with Evie, emphasizing that she tried to stop the others and hoped for the Lord's trust. The Lord sighed, noting that it seemed she intended to lie to the end and was not going to open the door, causing the young lady to become confused and scream in his direction. The girl was overcome with fear and wondered if the young man could really leave her alone in a dark, empty room without help. The fear grew stronger because the silence and darkness of the room made her situation even more alarming and unbearable for Ramona. Ramona turned around in a hurry and peered into the room, but her eyes were met only by pitch darkness, consuming everything around her. Fear overwhelmed her completely, and she burst into tears, realizing that it was she who gave the order to lock the girl up. The weight of guilt gripped her heart. Suddenly, she noticed how the doors slowly began to open, letting in soft light and giving a tiny spark of hope. Ramona froze in place, overcome with shock as the little orphan appeared before her, her presence both surprising and alarming. Taken aback by the surprise, Ramona instantly became curious about where the young lord was at that moment, her heart pounding with anxiety. With fury in her eyes, she looked at the tiny girl and painfully tried to understand whether this whole incident was really her idea. At that moment, Ramona ran out of the room, shouting to the orphan that behind the sweet and innocent appearance, there was a cunning strategy that used the Lord for revenge. Her voice trembled with anger and resentment as she stated that they had both grown up as commoners, but fate had decreed that their living conditions were completely different. Ramona shouted at the girl, demanding an answer, but when she received silence, she raised her hand, preparing to strike, despair and anger driving her crazy. Serafina, who had been watching the scene closely, instantly grabbed the girl's hand, stopping the outburst of aggression and bringing order to the chaos. The young lady froze in amazement when she saw the dean standing before her, whose sudden appearance instantly filled the room with power and stern authority. Serafina looked with fury and contempt at Ramona, who was trembling with fear and trying to justify herself, calling what happened a simple misunderstanding. The sorceress demanded an explanation, making it clear that she understood the whole setup and would not tolerate lies or attempts to hide the truth. Ramona froze for a moment in shock, realizing that her confession of what she had done had become known to everyone present, and the truth could no longer be hidden. She knew she had to fix the situation, so she pulled herself together and approached the young lady, feeling the weight of her own guilt. Bursting into bitter tears, Ramona admitted that she had ordered her friends to lock the girl up, explaining the act as a sudden burst of jealousy. The girl explained that she just wanted to tease Evie a little and couldn't even imagine that everything would go so far and turn into trouble. With tears in her eyes, Ramona realized her great mistake and begged the young lady to forgive her, hoping for mercy and understanding. Evie immediately declared that she did not forgive Ramona, and the young lady thanked her with a smile, only realizing the girl's words a moment later. The girl looked menacingly at the lady, reminding her that because of her actions, she ended up in a cold and dark place, and only thanks to luck, she was quickly found. Evie found herself in. She understood that the girl was small and fragile, locked alone in a dark room, but there was not a single tear on her face, which surprised the sorceress. Serafina realized that an ordinary child in a similar situation would have cried and called for her parents, but Evie showed rare fortitude and composure. Evie looked at the girl and understood that she realized the seriousness of what had happened, although she acted to the end, making a serious mistake. The young lady decided that she would not forgive the girl for now, realizing that the lesson must be learned, and the consequences must be clear and fair. Serafina watched the girl closely, realizing that it was time for proper punishment to correct the situation. The sorceress explained to the girl in her soft voice that there was nothing to be afraid of, because the punishment would be a sincere daily apology to Evie. Serafina added that this was the only way the girl could earn forgiveness, and that every day her efforts would be visible and tangible to Evie. With a gentle smile, Serafina asked the young lady how she felt about the proposed punishment, emphasizing its fairness and simplicity. Ramona was shocked by what she heard, did not expect such a decision, and categorically refused, stating that penalty points or some other punishment should have been assigned. The lady firmly replied that there was no other option, and warned that refusal would only increase the punishment, leaving the girl with few options. Ramona couldn't stand the tension and immediately rushed away, trying to avoid responsibility and apologies to Evie. Serafina sighed heavily, realizing that everything would only partially end peacefully, as Evie wanted, and she did not expect the girl to actually run away, avoiding an apology. Arcel left the room and asked his friend if her position had changed. Although she wanted to keep everything a secret from the other children, Evie sighed heavily and confirmed that her decision was immutable. She was not going to change her mind and would stick to her opinion. She explained with a smile that the headmistress of the orphanage had always acted this way, and she wanted to follow her example, acting correctly and responsibly. After some time, Evie entered the dining room, feeling that all eyes were on her, because the children saw the same girl who had recently gone missing. The whispers and attention were weighing on Evie. She had expected it, but she hurried to the table anyway, trying to remain calm in the tense atmosphere. Evie hurried to the small table, wanting to grab a sandwich and leave as quickly as possible to have some privacy and hide from prying eyes. Soon she ran into Ramona and froze for a moment, trying to understand what she wanted and how to behave in this unexpected meeting. At first, Evie thought the girl wanted to apologize, but a moment later, she realized that she had been mistaken in her assumptions, and the situation was more complicated. For a moment, she watched in bewilderment as Ramona walked away in a hurry, leaving behind a feeling of tension and slight anxiety. Evie understood that even in an orphanage, children needed time to collect their thoughts and apologize, so she herself was eager to finish her meal. Evie noticed that everyone was watching her closely, so she tried to hurry and eat quietly, trying to remain unnoticed. She was soon taken aback when her roommate came over and politely invited her to sit next to her, surprising the young lady with the unexpected attention. Evie was shocked, not expecting the meeting, but Irene greeted her with a gentle smile and grace, demonstrating friendliness and calm. The girl felt slightly embarrassed, not understanding why her neighbor had come to her, since she already had friends and acquaintances nearby. Irene explained that she wanted to talk because they were neighbors, but hardly spent time together, to which Evie quickly replied that she didn't feel awkward at all. She apologized sheepishly, trying not to speak too loudly, while feeling a slight nervousness from communicating with her neighbor. The girl noted that she was very glad to have the opportunity to talk with Irene, appreciating this moment of quiet communication. A moment later, the young lady watched her friend with a gentle smile as she ate quietly, enjoying the company of others. Irene could not tear her gaze away from the young lady, struck by her prettiness and natural grace. On the day of her admission to the Academy for the Gifted, the girl slowly walked to her room, surrounded by girls interested in her neighbor. Irene, upon entering the room, immediately noticed that the dormitory was well organized and comfortably decorated for future students. Irene was lost in her thoughts, dreaming of going out into the garden and looking around, admiring the surrounding beauty and silence. A moment later, the young lady was taken aback when she noticed a small, surprisingly elegant dress on the hanger, which attracted all her attention. She froze for a moment in surprise and slight embarrassment, because she had never seen such a tiny and cute outfit before. In her homeland, all the children were distinguished by a larger build compared to children from other regions, which was immediately noticeable. They really did look very large, and this made her look noticeably older than her peers, despite her young age. At 10, she already seemed grown up, aware that children from the South grew up quickly, as if they reached maturity instantly. For this reason, when Southerners saw a child who was still very small and young, they involuntarily began to spoil him, surrounding him with attention and care. Irene was surrounded by love because she was the youngest, and one day her sister asked what happened when she hit a boy in the street. The girl explained that she hit him because he grabbed and lifted her skirt, so she made sure that something like that didn't happen again. She shouted that the young man should not have done anything like that to other girls, and the Duke froze in shock, not expecting such boldness. Her sister was furious, not understanding how the boy could dare to do such a thing to the younger one. At that very moment, the Duke called his eldest daughter to sort out the situation and restore order. They whispered quietly, discussing how to punish the boy so that such behavior would not happen again and everything would be under control. The Duke and his daughter looked at Irene with a smile and assured her that they had already resolved the issue and that she should not worry, the boy would be punished. At that moment, the Duke looked closely at his youngest daughter and noted that lately she had been creating problems too often, which did not go unnoticed. They suggested that Irene needed a new social circle so that she could develop and learn in a more suitable environment. The girl was shocked when she learned that she would be sent to an academy for gifted children, and she couldn't immediately comprehend what was happening. Ines smiled and announced that the application had already been submitted, and very soon Irene would be going to study at the academy, opening a new chapter in her life. Ines explained to her sister that she already had everything she needed, but she needed friends for communication and support in everyday life. She added with a smile that for full development, she also needs social connections in the capital to be confident in the future. Ines stated that friends and connections are almost the same thing, so Irene should immediately go to the academy, combining studies and new acquaintances. Irene knew her sister was right, and that she should behave as a member of the Terrence family should, fulfilling all her obligations with dignity. She realized that she had to fulfill the role assigned to her by her family, maintaining the reputation and status of the family in society. The bloodline has accumulated wealth and power through trade for centuries, requiring children to strictly follow a predetermined path appropriate to their status and abilities. The Duke noted that his daughter had previously disliked the rumors about her dreams of becoming crown princess, and now she could take the opportunity to dispel the empty speculation. Irene attended just one social event, and rumors immediately spread about her claim to the position of crown princess. She knew that in reality she would have refused such an offer. Meanwhile, with shining eyes and admiration, she watched her neighbor's beautiful outfit, not expecting that she would have the chance to live with the sweet girl. But then the young lady noticed with bewilderment that the room was already occupied. Tattered children's clothes, shabby and old, lay scattered on the floor. They were shocked to realize that a high-ranking lady could not share a room with an orphan, and it seemed impossible to them. Irene, in turn, did not have time to answer the girls, when suddenly a sweet and young lady entered the room, changing the whole atmosphere. Irene looked at the young lady in surprise, not understanding how such a tiny and cute child could even exist in this world. She was in shock and felt an overwhelming desire to rush to the girl and hug her, but she restrained her emotions, maintaining control over herself. A moment later, the young lady was taken aback, noticing in front of her a very thin girl with dry and brittle hair, which caused alarm. She wondered if this was a sign of the abuse she had only heard about in stories and realized she needed to help. Deciding to intervene, she approached the child and cautiously asked if children were starved in the orphanage where she lived. Then the young lady was taken aback when Evie, gathering her courage, exclaimed that her head mistress would never have done such a thing because she was a kind and caring woman. Irene was taken aback, realizing she had spoken too harshly, and at the same time, her companions pounced on the poor girl, increasing the tension in the room. She was shocked and wanted her companions to shut up, realizing that she herself had made a mistake and should apologize to the girl. Irene understood that things would only get more complicated in the future, and she needed to get the girls out of the room as quickly as possible to stop the injustice. She slowly walked towards the exit, while her young companions continued to talk and insult the little defenseless girl for a long time. Irene stood frozen at the door for a moment, her gaze intense and full of confusion, because she understood that sooner or later she would have to sincerely apologize to her neighbor. The next day, the neighbor disappeared during an excursion, and Irene was left with no opportunity to talk to her or apologize for her words. The girl was acutely aware of her guilt. Although they shared a room, she paid almost no attention to her neighbor and understood that she would never win her friendship. With a heavy sigh, Irene timidly called out to her neighbor, trying to put all the sincerity into her words and show that it was truly important to her to correct the mistake. She looked closely at the sweet girl, feeling confused and embarrassed, and tried to convey her desire to sincerely ask for forgiveness for her previous thoughts. Irene admitted that she had jumped to conclusions about the shelter and had spoken thoughtlessly, without intending to offend the people who genuinely cared about the girl. Irene sighed heavily, timidly admitting her guilt, and sincerely regretted the words that could hurt her neighbor. Evie was surprised by such frankness. Evie sighed, remembering how every time she talked about the orphanage, the looks on others' faces filled her with pity, and it caused a quiet but sharp pain. Evie understood how much their headmistress's concern meant, and Irene felt the weight of her own mistake, fearing that her words might have destroyed trust. The girl smiled softly at her neighbor, noting her sincere apology, and thanked her for her courage to admit her mistakes and her attempt to make amends for the past. Irene, surprised by Evie's reaction, responded with a smile, happy and relieved, feeling grateful for the acceptance of her apology and her neighbor's friendliness. Evie also smiled and thanked Irene for her concern. Leaving a sandwich seemed like a sign of consideration, and the girl wondered where this knowledge came from. Evie explained that an academy employee had told her about her neighbor's concern, and this explanation had gently calmed Irene, freeing her from unnecessary guesses and worries. Irene sighed heavily, admitting that she had been very worried about her neighbor during her disappearance, afraid that something bad or dangerous might have happened to her. Irene noted with a slight smile that her neighbor was surprisingly small and cute, but immediately became embarrassed, realizing that she had said too much, and awkwardly whispered. Evie smiled softly at her neighbor, sensing her inner maturity and nobility, as if a princess from an old fairy tale stood before her, inspiring her with quiet grace. But soon, Evie's gaze caught a sweet, spontaneous side of her neighbor, which surprised her and filled her heart with warmth, causing a slight smile to appear on the girl's lips. For a while, the young ladies chatted pleasantly, talking about simple things, laughing and exchanging glances, enjoying a moment of friendship and trust without unnecessary tension. Irene, watching Evie, spoke about her thoughts and experiences, but at that very moment, her attention was riveted by the young man's voice, and she froze, slightly embarrassed. Ruska came closer, smiling, and asked if the girls had any free seats at the table. His easy manner and warm gaze made them slightly embarrassed. Ruska, watching his friend, gently invited him to sit down next to the girls, trying to make the situation more relaxed and friendly. The young men immediately greeted the girls, smiles flitting across their faces, but for some, the joyful greetings seemed alien and a little awkward. Ruska looked at Irene with a slight smile, understanding her origin and status, but wanted her to remind him of her name without formalities. Irene met his gaze coolly, asking cautiously if there was any need for any formal introductions or ceremonies. The young man froze, struck by such a cold and precise answer, not expecting that her words could be so direct and unyielding. Ruska glanced sideways at his friend and said with slight irony that the girl was like an exact copy of himself, causing a slight smile to appear on the face of the man sitting next to him. Evie tensed as she caught the wary, watchful gazes of the other children who were quietly watching what was happening, filling the room with a slight tension. That evening, the young ladies chatted leisurely among themselves, their conversations filling the rooms with warmth, laughter, and the genuine joy of being together. Evie, looking at her friend with a slight smile, thoughtfully noted that the courses would start tomorrow, and Irene immediately asked if she had chosen the subjects. Evie was confused, because there were too many subjects, and she could only enroll in 6, and she timidly asked Irene which courses she had decided to take. Irene explained with a slight smile that her family had already compiled a complete list of items, and she didn't even have to think about it. Evie was a little taken aback, but her friend reassured her. With a smile, Irene added that she wished Evie would choose the same courses as her so that they could spend more time together and strengthen their friendship. The next day, the young lady was deep in thought, not knowing which courses to choose, and an inner voice anxiously reminded her of the need to make the right decision. She noticed a new course on Imperial philosophy that had not previously been offered at her old school, and the unusual subject matter immediately piqued her interest. She also discovered ancient languages, and both subjects seemed enticing, promising to broaden her horizons and fill her days with meaning. Evie considered whether she should prioritize courses that would help her earn good money after graduating from the academy without missing out on important things. The girl understood that if she chose only practical subjects, the headmistress might be upset, because both mental development and knowledge were important. After weighing all the options, she decided to combine business with pleasure, choosing several courses that she enjoyed and several that could generate income. A moment later, she noticed that only math remained, a compulsory subject that could not be skipped, and her gaze lingered anxiously on the schedule. She noticed that there were many more teachers for the math course than expected, and this made her a little uneasy, causing confusion and stress. Ramona felt awkward among the other girls, fully aware that her peers were avoiding her, as if she were an outsider among them. She just wanted to quickly grab the food and leave, trying to hide her inner turmoil and anxiety so as not to attract unnecessary attention. But soon she was taken aback, noticing the young people sitting with Evie, who were chatting pleasantly, and this caused an incomprehensible irritation in her. Ramona watched the orphan's joy with fury and could not understand how a simple girl could enjoy life so freely. Every step she took seemed like a feat to her, because she was used to monitoring every action and always keeping herself within strict limits. Her anger was heightened by the thought that the girl from the orphanage was acting arrogantly, as if the place that should have been hers was already occupied by someone else. She wanted to find the girl's weak spot, watching her every move and looking for the moment to use any mistake against the orphan. Her goal was to catch the girl on the stairs to the professor's, when she was fawning and proudly boasting about her connections with influential lords. Ramona understood that before her was just a commoner, devoid of connections, and this made any pride she had just an illusion of significance. She was already making a plan to uncover the orphan's cunning and frame her in order to take her place in the eyes of her mentors and peers. But suddenly, all her careful thoughts were scattered when she noticed that the other girls had pushed the orphan right in the middle of the corridor. They mocked her, and Ramona froze in shock, realizing how cruelly the girls treated the little girl, causing her to feel undisguised pity. She watched the young lady with bewilderment and was amazed at her composure, because the girl endured such bullying every day without giving in. Ramona understood that in her place, she would have long ago found a complaint to someone, but at that very moment, she put her thoughts aside, realizing that it was not her concern. The girls took Evie's bag by force, continuing to mock her and further emphasizing her vulnerability in front of everyone around her. Evie tried to return the bag with a bold look in her eyes. Her gaze spoke of an inner strength that her offenders did not expect to see. They couldn't understand how a girl from an orphanage could act so self-confident, and Ramona froze, remembering her own bullying. The young lady was filled with rage, her voice loud and determined as she demanded that the girls not overstep the bounds of their station. Ramona couldn't bear the internal tension and instantly called out to Evie, her determination sparkling in her eyes, reflecting the boiling emotions and anxiety. She looked at the girls with fury. Unable to tolerate this, every movement and look expressed her determination to stop the injustice. Ramona studied the young lady closely and firmly stated that she had looked for her everywhere. Her voice was insistent, leaving no room for doubt. She then added that Lady Irene was looking for Evie, and the girls were taken aback, struck by the unexpectedness of what they heard and the firmness of the young lady. Ramona approached the girls and with a stern look asked if they had really been bullying Evie, and the ladies, with feigned innocence, denied it. At the same moment, they stated that they had only helped the girl up and returned her fallen bag, trying to appear honest and not involved in cruelty. A moment later, they added that it was time for them to leave. Ramona looked at them menacingly, and Evie tried to understand what was happening in surprise. The girl looked at her friend and quietly thanked her for her help, feeling warmth and protection amid the chaos of school intrigue. Ramona took a deep breath and declared that gratitude was unnecessary because she could not remain indifferent to the girl who was completely helpless. Ramona immediately pounced on the young lady and passionately asked why she tolerated everything, noticing that the aristocrats looked down on her. Evie, in turn, understood that compared to the bullying at her old school, this was almost nothing, and anxiety could no longer frighten her so much. The headmistress severely punished children who threw stones at her, and Evie couldn't admit out loud how much it bothered her at the time. Ramona sighed heavily as she left and told the girl that she should be careful, because the world around her was sometimes cruel and unfair. The girl was sincerely grateful for the support and felt the ice melting between them, and for the first time, a feeling of true trust arose. Evie slowly walked back to her room, feeling relieved that her new friend looked happy, and it was as if a heavy stone had been lifted from her soul. A moment later, she came to her senses, realizing that it was time to choose courses, otherwise the days would be wasted, and the opportunities for knowledge would be lost forever. The girl was worried that she had not chosen a math teacher and decided to trust the list, confident that all the teachers would be professional. A few minutes later, she greeted Madame with a slight smile and handed over the application for the courses she desired, feeling a little nervous and responsible. Evie left the room. She heard the whispers of her other classmates discussing the choice of math teachers, and she felt that she was not alone in her doubts. A moment later, the girls entered the hall and handed Madame their notes, and Evie watched with interest as a new page in her academic life began. But a moment later, the young lady noticed that someone had signed up for a mathematics class with Professor Males, and her heart began to beat with slight surprise. Her friend was stunned, because Professor Males was known for his strict character, and no one expected that anyone would dare to study with him. Everyone knew that his classes were extremely difficult, and students were afraid to even sign up, not knowing who would dare challenge such a teacher. The young lady thought with a soft smile that it was probably a simple mistake, since it was impossible for anyone not to know the story of the famous professor. Evie walked slowly down the hallway, watching her classmates quietly whisper about the schedule, a sharp envy and curiosity flickering in their eyes. She herself headed to her first math class with joyful anticipation, feeling a slight excitement and thrill of the upcoming experience. It seemed incredible to her that the first lesson would be on her favorite subject, and strangely, her heart was filled with a slight anticipation of joy. Evie walked down the corridor with a slight smile and a humming voice, feeling how every movement was filled with joy and slight excitement before the new day. After a moment, she felt a slight bewilderment, because the audience turned out to be much further away than she had initially imagined, and this confused her a little. But soon, the young lady finally reached the old building, where the walls bore the marks of time and reminded of the past hidden in the quiet corridors. Evie looked at the building in surprise. It seemed completely different from the main building, and a slight feeling of alarm flashed through her soul. Despite her timidity, she gathered her courage, confidently opened the door to the building, and stepped inside, feeling how courage was softly intertwined with excitement. Evie looked around the room and wondered with a slight trepidation if she had been mistaken, because the interior of the building seemed strange and slightly oppressive from the inside. But she soon collected her thoughts, deciding to put her worries aside, because the most important thing was to find the right audience and not waste time. As she walked inside, the young lady froze for a moment. The classroom looked half abandoned. The empty desks and the semi-darkness created a strange feeling of loneliness. Soon, her attention was drawn to the writing on the board, neat lines of formulas and numbers that seemed to invite her to work and promise a challenge. She was told that she had a lot of problems to complete and turn them in by the next class. And Evie was puzzled, trying to figure out how to get such a large amount of work done. Evie instantly realized that for the students of the Gifted Academy, completing such tasks was a routine, and it was impossible to fall behind. She knew she needed to focus and solve all the problems to keep up with the other students. Meanwhile, the young ladies were chatting happily with each other, laughing and sharing news, almost oblivious to the people around them. A moment later, the young lady accidentally collided with someone, and the sudden contact caused slight confusion and bewilderment. She was taken aback, not understanding what exactly she had crashed into, and her heart began to beat faster from surprise and slight horror. But at that very moment, she froze when a tall man with a stern look, whose reputation inspired fear, appeared before her. Evie let out a cry of surprise, instantly realizing it was the professor, and she and the other students quickly backed away. The fear turned out to be justified, because she saw that before, children were afraid to even stand up for themselves or apologize when faced with his stern gaze. The professor was fed up with their endless rudeness and understood that none of the students had either the talent or the level for his strict and difficult classes. But the fear of him only grew stronger. He knew that no one had dared to sign up for his class before, so he had barely arrived at the auditorium when he was surprised to notice a tiny girl boldly entering. Evie met his gaze with a joyful and sincere smile, shining with innocence and seemingly unaware of the severity that all the other students felt. The professor looked menacingly at the girl, assessing her courage and impudence, realizing that this small figure was capable of challenging his usual authority. Professor Males looked at the girl wearily and sternly, his gaze piercing through her, as if evaluating her every word and movement. Evie took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage, and confidently stated that she had completed all the tasks that were given to him. But soon her face was clouded with slight regret. She quietly admitted that one task turned out to be too difficult, and she was unable to complete it. The man glanced at her with a cold grin, instantly realizing that the girl had not yet reached the level necessary for his strict training. As he left, he sternly stated that the girl must return immediately and re-register for the course, leaving Evie in complete shock and confusion. She hurried to the professor, timidly apologizing, and hopefully asked if she could ask him just one question. The man looked at her coldly and menacingly, emphasizing that the lesson was over and he was extremely busy, not wanting to be distracted for a second. Evie met his gaze intently, explaining that the task was indeed difficult, and she didn't want to keep him waiting, but she needed an answer. He sighed heavily, unable to resist the girl's sincere face, and decided to answer her. At that moment, the young lady beamed with happiness. At that very moment, Evie showed the professor the formula that everyone used to solve the problem. But even after carefully studying the textbook, she could not understand its essence. The professor asked her in surprise how she had managed to solve the remaining problems if she had not understood the most basic element of the formula. The man was stunned as he watched the incredibly neat and flawless solution to all the problems, so perfect that the notebook could be used as an example for all the students. Evie looked at the professor in bewilderment as he remained silent, merely studying her notes intently, without offering a word of assessment or advice. At this point, the man exclaimed sharply, noticing that she had used the same formula not only for one problem, but also for another where she had doubts. And this amazed him. Professor Males stated that she was irritating him, but at the same time, he ordered her to sit down and promised to show her a solution that could clarify everything that was unclear. The man began to explain each step in detail, demonstrating to the girl how to approach the task and avoid typical mistakes. After a careful analysis, he noticed that the problem was actually quite simple and asked if she had understood his explanation. Evie beamed with happiness and inner delight, amazed at how easily and elegantly the task that had previously seemed almost incomprehensible was being solved. In their casual conversation, the professor noted with a slight smile that she didn't seem so hopeless, and this softened his sternness a little. Looking out the window, the man noticed that it was already dark and reminded himself that he had planned to leave immediately after class, but had stayed late for the sake of an interesting student. Evie thanked the professor with a joyful smile for his patience and explanation, feeling both excitement and relief at the clear solution. She bowed and sheepishly stated that she was going to go to registration to change the subject, worried about her mistake. The man couldn't stand it any longer, and calmly said that she didn't need to do that at all, and Evie was momentarily confused. Not understanding his words, the professor reminded her that the next lesson would begin with a full course, and that changing the subject was not at all necessary, causing the girl to feel quiet joy. A moment later, he announced that it was time for him to leave, leaving Evie alone with her thoughts and a new sense of responsibility. Evie was overjoyed because she realized that the professor accepted her as a real student, and this gave her confidence and inspiration. After a while, the professor began to wonder if his explanation had been too simple for Evie, and doubts began to trouble his thoughts a little. He sincerely felt sorry for the girl, and decided that while the period of changing courses was not yet over, it was worth trying to convince her to choose the right subjects. But a moment later, he entered the auditorium and noticed Evie's shining face, which greeted him with a joyful smile and shining eyes. The professor asked in surprise if she had cleaned the entire classroom, and Evie admitted that the dust was making it difficult for her to concentrate on her studies. The girl added that cleaning was surprisingly easy for her, and the professor, amazed by such diligence, realized that this was no ordinary student. He remembered that he had never met anyone before who showed such genuine enthusiasm for his subject, and it gave him a quiet respect. Then the professor could not resist and sincerely praised the young girl, noticing how diligently she worked, and this caused her surprise and embarrassment. Evie was surprised, because she did not expect to hear such words, and a trembling feeling of pride and joy arose in her chest at the same time. Professor Males, noticing her confused look, emphasized that physical endurance was important for concentration, but she should not repeat something like this again. Evie couldn't contain her emotions and immediately agreed with him, happily feeling that her efforts were noticed and appreciated by the teacher. After some time, they calmly began to study the new material, and the atmosphere in the classroom was filled with curiosity and a desire for knowledge. Each time, the young lady asked the professor questions, which he answered patiently, and she absorbed every word with pleasure, feeling the delight of learning. Sometimes the professor would fall for her dexterity and clever tricks, answering unexpected questions, and at the same time, embarrassment would play on his face, causing Evie to feel quiet joy. After some time, their lesson ended, and the professor happily saw Evie off, seeing how diligently and conscientiously she completed each task. He noted to himself that he had not met students at the academy for a long time with such perseverance and a sincere desire for knowledge, and this aroused his admiration. He was especially struck by the girl's talent. Her level of genius was evident in her ability to grasp complex topics faster than other students. Professor Males had taught countless children, but there was a rare student who made teaching truly enjoyable and inspiring. She could master material in a single day that took others several weeks, and he realized that he had a future great mathematician in front of him. So he decided to carefully analyze her teaching methods, and a moment later went to the dean of the academy to discuss his students' prospects. She looked at the teacher in surprise, not understanding what could have happened, because the whole day had been going so calmly, and now such an unexpected situation had arisen. After some time, the young people approached their friends and sincerely thanked them for saving them a place at the table next to them. Ruska looked at the young lady with interest and surprise, trying to understand what she was doing, since she was eating and looking focused at the same time. Male's homework, and the young man froze in surprise, as there were many rumors about the teacher's strict nature. Hearing this, Evie put down her notes and looked at them intently, trying to figure out what exactly they were talking about and why it surprised her so much. Irene looked at the girl with surprise and bewilderment, because she understood that Professor Males was famous for his eccentricity and difficult lessons. Arsel calmly noted that unlike other teachers, this professor didn't care about his students, and that after graduation, it would be difficult to get useful recommendations or connections. The girl looked at them with slight bewilderment and explained that her chosen professor turned out to be incredibly kind, patiently explained the material, and made the lessons engaging. With a smile, she added that, thanks to the professor, she had already mastered several sections of higher mathematics, which amazed everyone, since this seemed almost impossible for her age. Arsel was taken aback and wondered if the girl had deliberately chosen such a difficult course to get ahead of the others, since it required not only talent, but also enormous diligence. The thought that further inaction would deprive him of the title of the best student prompted him to decide to also enroll in a strict and famous teacher. Ruska was stunned and asked his friend how bored he would be in class without a companion, when he suddenly decided to also sign up for a course with the same professor. Irene froze for a moment in sudden shock, realizing that her neighbor and the young people might now be closer to each other than she herself expected. She realized that now they would have to study in the same class without her participation, and a slight anxiety squeezed her heart, like a cold wind, piercing her thoughts. At that time, she firmly decided to take this course on her own, because the teaching style of the other professor did not suit her inquisitive nature at all. Evie turned to her friends with a joyful smile and asked with genuine admiration if they would really be studying in the same class with her. She joyfully shared her impressions, sincerely considering this event wonderful, but each of them understood that they could not lag behind such an outstanding girl. Meanwhile, the teacher walked slowly to the classroom, thoughtfully pondering what he could best teach the young student today, whose abilities amazed the imagination. He headed to class happily because he knew that the girl would be happy, especially when she saw that he had brought a small snack for her. But at that very moment, he was taken aback when he heard that other children were trying to intervene and take his most capable student away from him. The professor burst into the classroom angrily, glared at the intruders, and loudly asked who they were and what they were doing in his class. He was stunned by the audacity of the strangers, not understanding how someone dared to enter and threaten the order of the classes and the safety of the student. Evie ran happily towards the teacher, greeting him, and he immediately softened, smiling back, while the others watched the scene with a little confusion. But a moment later, the professor glanced sideways at everyone present, warning with his gaze that such behavior was unacceptable. And then, his face changing, he asked with cold fury who these children were who were trying to take the student to another class. They unanimously explained that the auditorium was located too far from the main building, and the journey to it was tiring and long. The professor coldly stated that this was still the Academy's territory, and they could leave a little earlier to make it to class in time. Irene stated that her friend even developed dark circles under her eyes due to the countless amount of homework, and this was causing her anxiety. The professor froze for a moment, watching as the children pelted him with reproaches, as if he were deliberately mocking their most diligent student. Irene firmly stated that if he did not want his best student to change classes, he should choose a classroom closer to the main building, and the professor agreed. The professor sighed and stated that if that was the case, then everything was fine, but added that he only taught higher mathematics and asked if they would be able to keep up with the program. The young men were a little puzzled, but at that very moment, the Lord confidently declared that he could handle the program without any problems. The young men looked at him with bewilderment, irritated by his self-confidence and boasting, and the professor only sighed and noted that these were just empty words for now. At that very moment, he looked intently at the children and declared that he would give them one difficult task. He said that after completing the task, he would determine who would be able to attend the course and who would not. A moment later, the professor wrote the problem on the board and sternly noted that they had exactly 15 minutes to solve it. Arsel, in turn, completed the task faster than anyone else, in just a few minutes, demonstrating his mental agility and dexterity. He sighed heavily, feeling tired from the countless complaints, and discontent filled him. But Arsel was beaming with joy, feeling the long-awaited success. A few minutes later, all the students were immersed in complex problems. Tension hung in the air, and every thought required utmost concentration. Ruska, having gathered his strength and attention, suddenly realized the correct way to solve the problem, and his heart began to beat with joyful anticipation of victory. A few minutes later, he realized with a triumphant smile that he had succeeded. Delight filled him, and a mixture of pride and relief spread through his chest. The professor looked at the boy in bewilderment, amazed at how fragile logic and courage intertwined in his solution to the most difficult problem. He could not understand how the young student had decided to use the only formula he knew, and his heart sank with admiration and slight embarrassment. The professor sighed heavily, realizing his luck, but deep down he understood that children like Ruska were capable of discovering new approaches and laws of mathematics. Another deep breath, and he announced that the boy was accepted. And Ruska, with a joyful smile, could hardly contain his delight, feeling that the victory was almost unbelievable. At that very moment, the young lady, filled with excitement, looked at her friend, realizing that precious time was quickly running out and she needed to take advantage of the opportunity. She felt anxious, her heart pounding, doubting whether her friend would be able to cope with the task that could determine their success in the lesson. Suddenly, she noticed her friend, shining with amazing calm, as if there was no fear or pressure from the strict professor around her. Evie felt a quiet joy, because she didn't expect anything else from her friend. Her composure was amazing even in the most tense situation. Amazement and confusion grew inside the young lady. She did not know how to act, watching her friend's determination as if time had slowed down. She had no precise solution to the problem, but her icy calm allowed her to maintain clarity of thought despite the impending tension. Meanwhile, the professor had already approached the dean of the academy, considering his next steps, as Evie's talent required special attention and support. Serafina, surprised by what was happening, looked closely at the professor, trying to understand what news or decisions caused such a serious expression on his face. He explained that he wanted to learn more about Evie's abilities, as he planned to become her mentor, seeing her as an exceptionally gifted and promising child. Serafina sighed heavily. A feeling of anxiety overwhelmed her, because the girl already had a guardian, and the professor flared up with rage, wanting to know who had surpassed him. She timidly explained that for security reasons, she could not reveal the information, but the professor growled in anger that this was unacceptable to him, because he was the greatest mathematician in the empire. The man demanded an immediate answer from the lady, threatening to meet with her guardian in person, but Serafina reluctantly stated that such information was too complex and dangerous to disclose. With great effort, she said goodbye to the professor, internally cowering with fear, while silently asking for forgiveness for breaking the usual rules of keeping her guardian's secret. Meanwhile, the chancellor, looking closely at the emperor, announced the upcoming meeting, causing everyone present to feel the growing tension. The emperor sighed heavily, feeling the weight of responsibility, and realizing that he would not be able to avoid participating in a meeting that promised to be extremely important and difficult. The young lady was in a state of confusion at this time. She did not know what to do because time was running out, and it seemed to her that she might be the one who would not cope with the test. The young lady looked at the teacher intently, collecting her thoughts, and quietly called out to her, feeling anxiety gradually growing in her chest. She carefully tried to figure out what to do in a situation where the meaning of the problem eludes her, and no solution seems obvious or correct. The lady calmly noted that the girl had already mastered almost all existing formulas, and therefore it was unlikely that there was a task that would be beyond her capabilities. However, the young lady was constantly confused about choosing the right formula, and then the mentor emphasized that the ability to determine the correct solution is an important skill. Irene considered using all the formulas she knew at once, but the teacher pointed out that this was an acceptable approach, although extremely ineffective. At that moment, the young lady suddenly realized that she already had mastered all the basic formulas, and this discovery filled her with quiet confidence. She clearly understood that she had no right to remain inactive and wait for failure, because the desire to win burned in her heart stronger than any fear. The professor watched the young lady closely, noticing how she chose the wrong formulas again and again, but did not lose her tenacity and concentration. The young people saw that there was only 1 minute left until the end, and their anxiety grew because their friend's actions seemed chaotic and incomprehensible to them. Meanwhile, the young lady tirelessly went through various formulas, as if searching for the one true thread that could lead her to a solution. Suddenly, it dawned on her, and remembering the last possible formula, she quickly applied it, completing the task and hurrying to the professor with a sinking heart. She managed to hand over the sheet with the solution literally at the last moments, when time was almost up, and the tension that had been holding her down began to gradually ease. After a brief moment, the professor carefully examined the answer and confirmed its correctness, which was an unexpected relief for her after such intense work. Everyone around looked at the girl with joy, because they were worried about her more than they could admit, and were afraid that she would not cope with this test. The professor looked at her solution with surprise, noting how she had used so many formulas in such a short time, even though such a method seemed extremely ineffective. However, he clearly saw that her mind was working at an astonishing speed, and he understood that not every student would dare to act so boldly and unconventionally. With a heavy sigh, he acknowledged the result and allowed everyone present to attend his classes, thereby finally determining their future path of study. However, a moment later, he wearily asked them not to bring any more new students, as even his patience was at its limit in the face of such a stormy influx. The professor also noted that he would find a new classroom closer to the main building, and this news immediately filled the children with genuine joy. After some time, Arsel looked at his friend in surprise, not understanding the reasons for his confusion, because the test had been successfully passed. Ruska, in turn, felt growing confusion, realizing that from the very first day, he would have to cope with a huge volume of tasks. Evie watched with a soft smile as her friends began to playfully wrestle with vivacity and joy, seemingly forgetting the recent tension. But a moment later, she realized her success with quiet confidence, and this amazed the young lord, who had not expected such speed and determination. Everyone looked at her in surprise, amazed at how quickly she completed the task, while the others found it beyond their capabilities. Arsel felt a flash of irritation, realizing that he had been passed over again, and it hurt his pride more than he wanted to admit. But the next moment, everyone's attention turned to the young lady when her stomach growled traitorously, causing her to become embarrassed and look down. They couldn't help but laugh, but there was no mockery in this merriment, only warm participation, and soon they invited her to go and eat together. A moment later, the young people headed to the dining room, feeling the attentive gazes of those around them, filled with curiosity and discussion. Irene looked closely at her friend, trying to understand her choice, and Evie, with a slight smile, decided to limit herself to a simple sandwich, remaining true to her habit. Irene was genuinely surprised to notice that her friend consistently chose only sandwiches, and this observation aroused a quiet curiosity in her. The young lady felt embarrassed, feeling the attentive gaze on her, and for a moment she was at a loss, unable to find the words to explain her simple and cautious habits. After a moment, she finally admitted that the rest of the food seemed unfamiliar to her, and therefore it was easier for her to choose a sandwich than to be confused by an unfamiliar choice. At this time, young people approached them with slight smiles, reminding them of their order, since the wait had dragged on, and the dining room was already filling with the noise of voices. Evie looked at one of their trays in surprise, noticing an exquisite dish that looked incredibly appetizing and aroused her genuine interest. Then she looked at her friend with curiosity, trying to figure out what his dish was called, because its appearance seemed unusual and attractive to her. With a slight smile, she admitted that she wanted to choose something of her own, not repeat what others did, and therefore she was genuinely interested in finding out what dishes they prepared in the cafeteria. Irene, with a warm smile, suggested the unexpected idea of ordering one dish from each, but Evie was at a loss to imagine how much food might go untouched. Irene confidently noted that their companions could easily handle any amount of food, and with gentle persistence suggested that they study the menu together. Ruska was shocked by what was happening, realizing that he was once again drawn into a situation where his opinion was the last one, and this left him confused. A moment later, their table was laden with a multitude of exquisite dishes, and Evie, holding her breath, looked at this splendor, which she had never seen before. She looked at the many dishes in front of her with slight bewilderment, not knowing which one to start with. But her friends, smiling, gently pushed the most appetizing ones towards her. Evie chose her friend's dish with genuine joy, feeling a pleasant excitement, because she was about to try something completely new and unusual for the first time. She slowly moved the plate closer and began to taste it carefully, as if she was afraid to destroy this fragile and unfamiliar moment. But the very next moment she got carried away and began to eat quickly, forgetting about everything around her, which caused surprised looks from her friends. With a beaming smile, she made it clear that the taste was delicious, as she had never tasted such exquisite food before. Irene watched her with a warm smile, enjoying her genuine delight, but still gently hinted that haste could have unpleasant consequences. Evie glanced at her friend with a curious smile, noticing his pace and wondering if he had already managed to finish several servings. Irene looked at him sternly, coldly noting the fairness of what he had said, and he was confused, feeling awkward, because the excuses sounded less and less convincing. Ruska quickly turned his attention to his friend, hinting at his appetite, and the young ladies realized with amazement that he had already managed to empty several portions. Arsel sighed heavily, feeling slightly irritated. At the same time, he tried to stop his friend, whose actions were attracting too much unnecessary attention. The young ladies watched the scene in amazement, unable to look away as a scene of unexpected vivacity unfolded before them. The young men devoured the dishes one after another with astonishing appetite, and the girls were amazed to realize how quickly the food was disappearing. Ruska looked at his friend with a slight smile and decided to order more food, while the young ladies, in shock, tried to figure out how much they could possibly consume like that. He invited his friend to the table and announced that the Duke's children were planning to host a dinner the following day, which caused slight confusion among those present. Ruska asked with interest whether he would accept the invitation, but the young lord confidently stated that he had no intention of going anywhere. Then he added that he would stay close to Evie, and Ruska was amazed by his friend's unexpected decision, not hiding his surprise. He even exclaimed that he agreed only because his friend insisted on the need to communicate more, and Arsel, with a slight sigh, said that it was a habit. Ruska was perplexed and surprised, because before it took his friend an eternity to get used to him, and now he spends time with someone else without hesitation. Ruska looked closely at his friend and felt that he was now beginning to understand the motives behind his actions, although he himself could not yet fully explain them to himself. He suggested to his friend that he think about who their friend might resemble, smiling slightly as his thoughts became confused with guesses. Arsel looked at his friend with slight bewilderment, not understanding what he was talking about, and tried to grasp the meaning of these strange arguments. He realized that he had never communicated with anyone except his friend, and therefore it all seemed strange to him, but the solution remained hidden. At that moment, he turned around and looked intently at the young lady, trying to discern in her someone familiar from the past or imaginary. He watched her laugh and chat casually with her friend, and he smiled faintly, struck by her ease and naturalness. Arcel thought for a moment, as her slight smile suddenly reminded him of someone, and his heart slightly sank from the memory. The young lady looked at the boys with a soft smile, raising her eyebrows slightly, and asked if they were the children Clovis had spoken of. The young people froze for a moment, amazed by her elegance and natural grace, because they never expected to meet someone so beautiful. The lady, smiling faintly, announced that she was just about to go apple picking. Her ease and calm caused slight embarrassment in everyone around her. She asked with genuine interest if they would like to join her, as if inviting them on a small but joyful adventure. The Duke informed his son that the Crown Prince had insisted on holding the wedding at this location because the scenery was truly beautiful, and the meeting with prominent personalities was priceless. Arcel sighed heavily, feeling tired after a long day, but he held back his emotions, smiling and remarking that his family members should be able to endure such trials. The Duke smiled to himself, knowing that Arcel would endure everything with dignity, for this was exactly the strength of character he expected from his son. At the same moment, the Duke inquired how things were going with Ruska, showing subtle concern for the harmony between his son and the young man. Arcel sighed, assuring his father that there had been no problems, and the Duke nodded in relief, glad that his son maintained a good relationship with Ruska. He said that they would have to work together for a long time, and added that he himself had once been friends with the Marquise, which inspired a little confidence. Arcel felt a little confused, as it was not easy for him to get along with a child whose immaturity sometimes baffled him. He sighed heavily, realizing that he would now have to take the initiative into his own hands and direct the joint work himself. Arcel looked closely at his father and admitted that he had heard rumors about the Crown Prince's bride, that there were rumors that she possessed magical powers. The Duke frowned, surprised that such rumors had reached his son, and carefully asked him not to believe everything, since rumors often turned out to be lies. After some time, they arrived at their destination, and the Duke hoped with slight anxiety that his son understood the full meaning of his words. He then hurried to the knight, apologizing for being late, and at the same time inquiring how things were going in their joint plans. The knight urged the Duke on slightly, and Arcel glanced to the side and noticed that his friend was hurrying somewhere, barely concealing his impatience. The young man quickly approached his friend, trying to understand where he was going in such a hurry, feeling a slight worry for him. The friend admitted with a smile that boredom had pushed him to go into the forest, to have some fun, and feel the freedom among the trees. Arcel was slightly puzzled, as he had been told earlier that walking alone in the forest could be dangerous, and anxiety immediately overwhelmed him. Ruska turned around abruptly and informed his friend that if he didn't want to go, he would go himself, which immediately stunned Arcel and made him stop. Arcel, watching his comrade, felt alarmed, shouting about the danger of the forest, because any wrong move could lead to lost steps. Suddenly, the young people came across an amazing person and seemed to be frozen, unable to believe their eyes in the face of such beauty. The young lady greeted them with a gentle smile and asked with a touch of playfulness if they were the children Clovis had mentioned. She beamed as she told me she was going apple picking, and her easy grace made the moment almost magical, as if time had stood still around her. Then she gave them a beaming smile, as if inviting them to play, and asked if they would like to join her on a walk in the forest. Arcel froze for a moment, numb, realizing that standing before him was the same mysterious woman from the rumors he had heard about earlier. He had heard before that a young lady wandered through the forest every day, and rumors had surrounded her with a strange, almost frightening aura, as if she were a witch. There were rumors that deep in the forest, there was her hidden lair, where she mysteriously conducted experiments with dark magic and influenced the Crown Prince. Arcel felt fear, imagining how she could drag them into the depths of the forest for her mystical experiments, and instantly refused to follow her. Ruska, with shining eyes and a radiant smile, immediately agreed to the proposal, his passion and courage shining brighter than the sunlight in the forest. The young man hurried to his friend and quietly tried to hold him back, but Ruska only looked at him in bewilderment and decided that anyone who didn't want to could stay. With a radiant smile, Ruska rushed towards his new acquaintance, as if all the energy of the world had gathered in his quick steps, and the forest greeted him with a quiet whisper. Arcel stood stunned, not understanding how his friend could rush into the forest so recklessly, and his heart sank with anxiety and fear for his friend. He couldn't believe that Ruska had fallen for the apples, and had voluntarily gone into the depths of the forest with the mysterious girl, as if not noticing either the danger or the rumors. Arcel watched them go for a while, feeling the weight of responsibility, because he would have to answer for everything that happened next. He understood that by leaving his friend in trouble, he could become a victim of dark magic, and there would be no one else to come to his aid. Anxiety gripped his heart. Remembering his father's words about supporting a friend, Arcel resolutely followed, not wanting to leave his comrade alone in the face of the unknown. He knew the witch might do something dangerous, and that thought made him give chase without hesitation, his heart pounding with fear and determination. A moment later, he ran after them, quickening his steps, because his friends had already gone far away, and any moment could change their fate. Meanwhile, the young lady, with a radiant smile, talked casually to the boy, as if the forest and its dangers did not exist at all. Arcel was puzzled. His heart was squeezed with anxiety, because he ran with all his might, and the picture seemed incredibly strange and unreal. It seemed that with each passing second, they were moving further and further away, as if they were hiding in the shadows of the trees, and he was in danger of losing sight of his friends. He quickened his pace, stumbling and not looking at his feet, losing his breath, but not wanting to give up, because any delay could cost him his friends. Suddenly, with a crash, he fell into the hole, feeling pain and numbness, his heart pounding wildly, and the thought that he had broken something ran through him like an icy shiver. A moment later, he heard his name and shuddered, his heart beating faster, as if the forest itself was warning him of impending danger. Ruska looked at his friend with fear, assuming that the fall could have left a serious injury, and thoughts of a possible breakdown did not give him peace. At that very moment, the young lady cast a menacing glance at the boy, realizing that hesitation could cost him too much. Without a second thought, she threw herself into the deep hole, as if gravity and fear had vanished in the face of her determination to save her friend. He froze in horror, not believing that she had risked herself for him, and he understood that it was impossible to escape. His leg hurt, and time was slipping away with every moment. Arcel, trembling with fear, shouted to the witch, warning her that he was the Duke's son, and promised to tell his father everything if she did not back down. He shook with terror as he watched her approach, aware that his threat had no effect yet, and fear filled every cell of his body. But moments later, he was taken aback, opening his eyes to a feeling of warmth and a blinding light, as if nature itself had intervened in what was happening. His heart froze in surprise when he realized that the evil witch, who seemed like a threat, had actually used power, healing him instantly. Lillian looked at him with a soft smile and explained that she had helped and that he was okay now, and he was taken aback when he noticed how the wound had suddenly disappeared. Arcel watched her in bewilderment, amazed that the witch could heal, and at the same time realizing that her abilities went beyond the ordinary. He tried to guess her motives, feeling that her help could not have been selfless, and his heart sank with a strange mixture of surprise and apprehension. His mind searched for an answer. Why did she save him, and expected that some invisible debt would follow, hidden behind her enigmatic smile? He almost guessed that if it was a matter of family prestige, any rewards would be discussed with his father, and this increased the tension. But a moment later, his surprise reached its limit, when a light blow to the head reminded him that the lady acted in her own way, and it was impossible to predict her. He was stunned, not expecting such a slight mockery from Lillian. Her smile simultaneously surprised and made his heart beat faster. Lillian watched him closely, radiating joy and warmth, as if reminding him that first aid is always accompanied by a simple, "Thank you." After a long separation, he tried his best to suppress the memories, assuring himself that her image no longer troubled his mind. Suddenly, he perked up, throwing all his thoughts away, as if his consciousness was being cleared of unnecessary emotions and old experiences. Evie looked at her friends sheepishly, apologizing for accidentally dropping her fork, while a slight awkwardness and gentle anxiety reigned around her. Arcel looked thoughtfully at his friend, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. Her gaze unexpectedly reminded him of an old acquaintance. He sighed slightly and hurried to get a new fork, but the girl said with a smile that it was completely unnecessary. He carefully handed her a clean fork and asked if she needed anything else, and she smiled softly, assuring her that this was enough. The young lady thanked him sincerely for his concern, and her eyes shone with joy, like a small spark of warmth in a cold room. Arcel smiled back, modestly noting that there was nothing to thank him for, and felt a quiet satisfaction inside. Evie looked at her friend carefully, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, and she stated that she would like to ask him one question. With a little timidity, she asked why he was so kind to her, and he was taken by surprise by this question. The young man was at a loss for words, as he did not know how to explain his feelings and actions in simple terms. At that very moment, memories flashed through his mind. Lillian, smiling, waving after him, shouting for him to be careful. He remembered how she had noticed his activity and love of life, her eyes shining with approval, and it made his heart tremble slightly. Arcel could not resist, and with slight anxiety, asked the young lady why she was showing them such unusual kindness and attention. He took a deep breath, realizing that many people believed the rumors and called her a witch without reason, which seemed unfair to him. Ruska looked at his friend in surprise, and quietly admitted that he had never drawn such conclusions, although doubts tormented him and his leg was bruised. At that moment, the young lady laughed quietly, watching their sweet quarrel, and her cheerful laughter added lightness to the tense atmosphere. She said with a kind smile that she knew some things in advance, and the guys just looked at her in bewilderment, trying to understand her words. She smiled as she looked at them and declared that someday the two of them would become important people for the happiness of her future child. Lillian added that they would spend a lot of time together, and thanks to their care, her child would grow up kind and happy. She talked about how sometimes they would be sad together, sometimes they would be happy, sharing every moment of their lives with them. For this reason, she wanted them to become real, reliable friends for her daughter, on whom she could always rely. Evie looked at her friend in surprise and carefully asked if everything was okay with him, because he suddenly fell silent. She was taken aback and embarrassedly stated that she had asked him an unexpected question, and he was not at all obliged to answer if he did not want to. At that moment, he sighed heavily, and with a gentle smile, explained that he had been so kind to her because they were true friends. Evie froze for a moment, stunned by his words, and couldn't believe that he had so directly admitted his friendship. She looked at him for a moment, embarrassed, realizing that she had not expected to hear such a thing and did not know what to say in response. Then Ruska called his comrades with a smile, announcing that they should quickly come to them so as not to waste time. Evie looked at her new friend with a joyful smile and invited him to join the others, trying to hide her slight excitement. He knew it was just his stupid thoughts, but for some reason, it seemed to him that Evie reminded him of little Lillian. The next morning, Evie walked into her friend's room with a beaming smile, looking forward to a pleasant meeting. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, she froze for a moment because her friend looked amazing and her outfit was delightful. Evie asked her friend with a smile if today was some special day, and Irene sighed heavily, realizing that her friend didn't know anything. At that moment, she explained with a joyful smile that today was Guardian Day, and each student received gifts and advice from their mentor. Irene added, with a touch of excitement, that the lobby would soon be filled with gifts, and she needed to go out and get hers. Her guardian had sent something particularly extravagant. Looking at her friend, Irene said that she would return later in the evening, trying to hide her haste and curiosity. Evie, slightly surprised, admitted with a smile that she had never received such gifts and was completely unaware of the existence of this holiday. Irene was taken aback and realized with alarm that she had forgotten that her friend might be left without a gift, and declared that this was not funny at all. A moment later, the young lady announced that it was time for her to go, her face shining with slight excitement. As she left, she said goodbye to her friend with a smile and promised to see her in the evening. Evie happily wished her a good journey. After some time, she went down to the lobby and froze, seeing a whole mountain of bright and sparkling gifts. Evie was amazed by the scale of what was happening, and at the same time surprised, because she had never seen anything like it. Her eyes sparkled with delight. She began to examine each gift with joy and curiosity, deciding to study the entire huge mountain down to the smallest detail. Meanwhile, the young girls whispered to each other, wondering why the orphan had come here, since, in their opinion, she would get nothing anyway. Evie knew her friend was right and decided to just take a quick look at what was happening, trying to remain unnoticed. Then the lady, with a slight smile, asked all the children to come to her, radiating friendliness and calm. She announced that she would call out names, and each person should approach one by one, as if participating in a small celebration. A moment later, She happily began distributing gifts, bringing beaming smiles to the children's faces with each box. The girls quickly pounced on their friend when they saw that she had received a brooch with sparkling jewels, and they began to whisper happily. The lady called the next girl with a slight smile, inviting her to her with gentle attention. Evie understood that even if she didn't get anything herself, she enjoyed watching the happy faces of those around her. This made her feel warm and calm in her soul, as if a soft, joyful aura reigned around her. The young girl looked around at everyone present with a slight smile and quietly announced that she would go into the room to open her gift. The children began to whisper among themselves, saying that she looked a little embarrassed and perhaps had been expecting something modest. Evie wondered if the girl was embarrassed by the simplicity of the gift, because in her place she would have been happy with any attention. The girl sighed heavily and decided to return to her homework, trying to distract herself from her worries. But the next minute, she froze in place when she heard someone call her name. She turned around in a hurry and wondered in bewilderment if she had misheard, because she couldn't believe she had heard her name. The very next moment, the young lady again said the girl's name, and Evie ran up to her with joyful delight. A moment later, the lady handed her a gift, sparkling with neat packaging, like something out of a fairy tale. Evie froze for a moment in embarrassment and surprise, as she had never received such a carefully wrapped gift before. For the first time in her life, the girl held something so special in her hands, and it seemed to her that this moment had come straight from the pages of a magic book. Evie was desperate to know what was inside the gift, and she carefully walked into the room to open it carefully. But a moment later she froze, hearing a sudden casual call that made her start. The young lady glared at her and demanded in a commanding tone that she give up the gift, declaring that she wanted to check something. Evie was stunned and did not expect such an intervention, but the girl insisted, noting that something was clearly wrong. A beggar from an orphanage could not have received such a luxurious gift. Evie's face turned pale, knowing that this simply couldn't be a mistake, and shock gripped her for a moment. Then everyone started whispering, noticing that the orphan seemed to have taken someone else's gift, since she could not have had a guardian. Evie was taken aback, insisting that her name was clearly written on the box, but the girl just shrugged, saying that the name could have been mixed up. While they were arguing, a young lady approached them and, in a soft but firm tone, asked them to stop bickering. She looked at everyone closely and emphasized that there was no evidence that the gift did not belong to her, and it was too hasty to judge her. Evie looked at the beautiful young lady in surprise, at a loss to guess who stood before her. Israela looked closely at Evie and asked if she was okay, as if sensing the girl's anxiety. Everyone around looked at the young lady in surprise, wondering why she was showing concern for a simple orphan. Evie stared at Israela, feeling a strange familiarity with her name, as if she had heard it from her roommate. At that very moment, the girl loudly exclaimed that an orphan from an orphanage could not have received such a luxurious gift. Israela sighed heavily and noted that it would be strange if Evie didn't have a guardian, and the girl was taken aback when she noticed the expensive packaging. Israela sighed heavily, feeling all the doubts around her, and noted that they were indeed surprisingly similar, causing surprise and distrust. She looked at Evie carefully, and although the idea seemed unpleasant to her, she insistently asked to open the gift right in front of everyone, making the girl's heart beat faster. The girl explained that this would help dispel all suspicions, and Evie felt the gazes of those around her burning right through her. Confused, Evie silently prayed for everything to go smoothly, as she had planned to carefully open the gift in her room, keeping the wrapping intact. Despite her anxiety, she made up her mind. If it would help clear up the misunderstanding, she must show the contents of the gift, clutching it in her hands with trembling and excitement. Evie slowly and carefully began to open the gift, wanting to keep every detail of the wrapping intact. Feeling a tremor in her hands, her caution enraged one of the girls, who pushed Evie sharply, taking the gift by force, as if mocking her efforts. Evie didn't have time to react. The suddenness of the event caught her off guard, and she fell to the ground with a crash, feeling pain and confusion. Watching her gift being torn apart so indifferently and rudely, Evie was in shock, her heart aching from the injustice of what was happening. When the girl finally opened the gift, she smirked and declared that she had expected exactly this reaction, adding to Evie's embarrassment and confusion. She mockingly stated that the pitiful appearance of the gift betrayed its belonging to an orphan, and noted that there was hardly anyone in the orphanage with a real guardian. The girl noted with disgust that the gift looked dirty, and she didn't even want to hold it in her hands, adding to Evie's humiliation. At that very moment, she contemptuously threw the box at Evie, causing shock and confusion in the girl, who did not expect such an attitude towards her gift. The box crashed to the floor with a bang, and a small shiny ball rolled out of it, reflecting light in all the colors of the rainbow. Evie was confused, but at that moment, her gaze was drawn to the beautiful ball, like a small miracle, which appeared right in front of her. Evie was shocked and didn't understand why they were doing this to her, because she hadn't done anything wrong, but her legs seemed to be rooted to the ground. She sat quietly on the ground, feeling the ridicule of all the other girls who laughed at her mercilessly. The girls looked at her with disdain, not believing that such a gift could have been sent to her, not thinking that it could correspond to her level. They wondered where they could have gotten such a pitiful cobblestone, and giggled, insisting that it had been sent straight from the shelter. At that moment, Israela approached Evie, smiled, and asked if she was okay, as if trying to support her. With a fierce grin, the girl said that she could not have imagined that everything would turn out exactly like this. Evie was shocked by their behavior, because she did not expect anything like this and did not know how to respond. At that very moment, the laughter of all the girls rang out in her ears, cutting her heart into pieces. Evie's soul, paralyzing her, and depriving her of the strength to rise from the ground. At that very moment, Evie sternly declared that even if everything they said was true, throwing away the gift was too much. Israela looked at the girl in bewilderment, surprised by her courage to object to the others. Looking at everyone present, Evie emphasized that for others, it might have been a trifle, but for her, this gift from her guardian was priceless and dear to her heart. A moment later, the ball in the young lady's hands began to glow with a bright, blinding light, and she was shocked, not understanding what was happening at all. All the ladies present froze, their eyes widening in amazement, for they had never seen anything like it. At that very moment, one of the girls stared intently at the shining ball. After a careful examination, she loudly declared that in front of them was a magic stone, and everyone saw it. A magic stone is a mysterious mineral that seems to contain powerful magical power. The stone changed its properties depending on its shape and size, as if it were alive, breathing magic, beckoning glances and souls. Since ancient times, its rarity has made it an incomparable treasure, prized not only by magicians, but also by aristocrats of the highest rank. Magic stones were extremely rare, and even a tiny fragment sparkled more than the most luxurious diamond jewelry. Evie was overcome with surprise. Her heart sank. The stone glowed brighter than the sun, radiating a warmth she had never felt before. At that very moment, the crowd rushed towards her, greedily stretching out their hands towards the shining miracle, striving to see and feel its magical power closer. Evie was shocked by the sudden change in the girls who were trying to get hold of the stone, and a feeling of anxiety and a desire to stop them flashed through her soul. At that very moment, the young lady burst into wild laughter, which rolled through the hall, sweeping away the surprise and slight confusion from the faces of those around her. Everyone present stopped in amazement, looking at her, unable to understand what had caused this unexpected and infectious laughter. She laughed with a slight smile, barely containing the joy that filled her like a spring stream, seething and uncontrollable. At that moment, it dawned on her. The stone that everyone had praised turned out to be a fake, a counterfeit, created for deception and empty admiration. The capital's markets were filled with merchants selling simple stones as magical ones, and this understanding flashed through her mind instantly. The gift given to the young lady was an obvious imitation, a glittering illusion devoid of true magic, which discouraged everyone around. The stone glowed only because a tiny, pitiful spark of magic was embedded in it, creating the illusion of real power. The girls around him instantly changed, their gazes conspiring, certain that the orphan could not have been given something so valuable and rare. Evie remained indifferent to the fake, but confusion filled her when a familiar voice suddenly rang out, piercing her attention. Everyone turned around, looking into the distance at the young lady, as if frozen in the moment, succumbing to her presence and mysterious aura. Irene, overcome with rage and bewilderment, looked around at everyone, feeling the tension and injustice filling the room. A real rage was boiling inside her. The attack on her friend ignited a flame in her heart, ready to flare up and burn away any doubt. Israela watched the lady with a fierce grin, the effectiveness of her appearance unwavering, like an innate character trait. She fixed her gaze on her opponent, piercing her attention, as if testing her opponent's willpower and hidden ambitions. The flower of high society, the object of envy and admiration. That is how she was always called, emphasizing her grace and unattainable beauty. With a slight smile, Israela looked around at the guests, expressing gratitude for their presence at the party and charming the room with her charisma. But a moment later, all the ladies rushed towards the main star of the evening, leaving Israela alone with a slight feeling of surprise. The youngest daughter of House Terrence appeared before high society, instantly stealing the spotlight that had previously been focused on her. Israela walked decisively towards the young lady, pushing aside the guests like a sea wave and once again attracting the attention of everyone present. Israela greeted the guest with a slight smile, introducing herself as the hostess of the evening. Her grace and confidence immediately attracted attention. In honor of the young lady's entry into the capital's high society, she prepared a small but carefully thought-out gift for her. Her gaze slid over the table, littered with all sorts of gifts, reflecting the chaos and the guest's endless desire for impressions. With a smile, she carefully put away the unworthy gifts, making room for the special gift that was to be the center of attention. Irene was stunned by Israela's demeanor, observing her determination and ability to combine sophistication with a touch of daring. Finally, Israela looked at the lady with a smile, showing off a carefully prepared gift. New shoes that shone like a little magic. Israela said that the shoes were a completely new design from the famous boutique, rare and incredibly beautiful, attracting the attention of everyone around. The ladies present were amazed by the gift. The shoes sparkled with elegance, and Israela gently made it clear that gratitude was not necessary. Irene studied the shoes closely, trying to place their familiar style, like a memory of a purchase several months ago coming to life. Israela didn't hide her surprise. Her eyes widened when she realized that the shoes were already recognizable and brought back memories for the guests. Irene noted that in the South, such a style had long been considered outdated, leaving Israela in slight bewilderment and quiet amazement. Israela was shocked and couldn't believe it, because the designer personally assured her that this style was a real novelty and not the familiar old one. Everyone present began to whisper, understanding Irene's composure, and tried to get closer to the girl, wanting to charm her with their attention. Fury raged within Israela. The late arrival of her rival had deprived her of her place, humiliating and hurting her pride, leaving a bitter feeling of defeat. She saw looks full of alienation, restraint brought to perfection, coldness and inaccessibility that challenged. Israela watched the lady with disdain, finding everything about her irritating, and once again felt that her rival had become an insurmountable obstacle. Israela looked at the lady with a caustic grin, feeling confident and superior, as if pointing out her slight delusion. Irene met her rival's gaze with a fury like fire and tried to comprehend what was happening, peering into the chaos of the moment. Israela felt the need to restore order, as Evie was causing a stir by flaunting the fake magic stone. With a grin, she noted that the young lady had recently arrived in the capital, and much of what was happening around her was still unknown to her. She casually noted that the markets were flooded with counterfeit magical stones, but Evie stubbornly continued to insist on the authenticity of her stone. There were unpleasant rumors about the girl, as if she did not respect the nobility, and, being a classmate, she simply could not stay away. Irene glared at the young lady, believing that she was the only one in the room who showed true ignorance. Israela looked at the lady with bewilderment, trying to understand what was being said, as if faced with an unexpected challenge. Irene said she was a member of the House of Terrence, a family with a long tradition and an impeccable reputation. She explained that the family dealt in magical stones at auctions, and from childhood, she was trained in the art of recognizing counterfeits. She couldn't believe her eyes, realizing the impossibility of such a simple fact remaining unnoticed by her. At that very moment, the young lady swore with ardent determination on the name of her house, feeling the magic of the real stone in her friend's hands. Evie stood there in amazement, shocked that her neighbor had suddenly taken her side, as if support had suddenly flared up. Irene, without wasting a second, stepped towards her friend, forcefully pushing the lady away, and clearly indicating that there should be no more obstacles in the way. Israela seemed to stand frozen, her heart pounding, and her mind silently searching for the right way out of the unexpected shock. The whole situation seemed explosive. The ladies watched Israela with bewilderment and alarm, seeing how she was arrogantly driven into a corner. Israela was stunned, unable to believe that a simple orphan could possess a magical stone, as if a secret had been revealed to her. The young lady approached her with quiet care, attention, and gentleness, as if testing whether Israela's heart could withstand this new turn of events. The thought of Irene's severity echoed in her thoughts, but at the same time, the lady felt the logic in her actions, as if every step was thought out and inevitable. At that very moment, the girl noted with determination that Irene had recently been showing unusual gentleness towards the orphan, changing the usual order of things. Israela looked away silently, not saying a word, feeling the cold of Irene, which seemed to envelop the entire space around with a stern breath of power. Now she saw the lady's warm affection for the orphan, emotions that had previously seemed alien to her awakened surprise and quiet admiration. Israela couldn't help but smile inwardly, finding a strange, almost playful charm in the situation. The lady who had seemed flawless suddenly revealed a fragile vulnerability, and Israela watched with interest as perfection took on an unexpected hue. The emperor sat quietly in his office, immersed in papers, every detail of the work gliding intently under his attentive gaze. A moment later, he raised his eyes to the window, thoughtfully assessing whether his ward liked the thing he had given her with care. In the evening, the silence of the office was broken by the quiet creak of the door, signaling an unexpected visit, which made the heart beat slightly faster. Upon entering, the chancellor apologized with slight embarrassment for his late appearance, but was in a hurry to discuss the important issue of guardianship over a student. The emperor carefully examined the man, internally checking whether this was really the same girl whose choice he had made personally. The man confirmed that everything was correct, explaining that the selection of guardians for the new students had gone smoothly, except for that girl, where unexpected difficulties had arisen. The chancellor explained that the latest rumors had only increased the greed of people willing to take advantage of the orphan after his release, and the emperor felt uneasy. He noted that all suitable candidates were already taken by other students, and the emperor wondered if there was already a solution to this situation. The man proposed appointing a fictitious person to the position, but in his search, he came across a suitable candidate, the baron's younger brother. The emperor carefully inquired about the name of the new tutor, and the chancellor quietly announced that the professor's name was Xian, commanding respect with his tone. Clovis sighed heavily, realizing the gravity of the moment, and came to the conclusion that the professor's name could become a shield for the orphan. He remembered their last meeting, where he had introduced himself as Xian in confusion, not attaching any importance to the words that now carried the weight of a fateful decision. The emperor paused, surprised by the choice of such an unusual title, but nevertheless admitted that there was a well-thought-out logic behind it. Clovis clearly understood that before him was an opportunity, rare and obligatory, requiring him to accept responsibility without the right to retreat. His gaze slid to the mountain of gifts, and in this abundance he noticed something strange, because usually such signs of attention were much more modest. An image of a magical stone flashed in my memory, softly shining in the semi-darkness, as if holding a secret and some kind of attractive power. He hoped that the soft glow of the stone would one day illuminate the girl's life, tearing her away from her recent loneliness and thick, almost tangible darkness. Irene looked at her friend in surprise, her gaze lingering on the torn paper, which revealed a strange and inexplicable care. Evie sighed heavily, feeling a pang of affection, for even the damaged packaging remained part of the gift from her distant guardian. The realization of what had happened brought a surge of rage. The thought that someone else's hands had treated the gift so cruelly awakened a storm of anger within her. Evie gently tried to calm her friend, acknowledging her previous confusion, but now a calm and quiet confidence was already glimmering in her heart. She felt a quiet but genuine happiness, because for the first time, someone had prepared a gift for her, filling her heart with warmth and hope. This bright feeling turned out to be stronger than the previous pain, ridicule, and insults, as if a soft light had driven out everything dark from her soul. Evie looked at her friend with curiosity, and Irene, with a slight weariness, realized the reason for her return, connected with a forgotten element of decency. The thought of her family's strict morals prompted her to quickly return to the dormitory, not wanting to become the object of cold instructions again. Irene hugged her friend warmly, sensing her anxiety, and decided to spend the day with her to dispel her fears and give her a sense of security. Evie smiled softly, feeling calm, because it was enough for her that her friend had already stood up for her, dispelling her previous fear. She treasured the gift with sincere gratitude, and even the thought of its authenticity lost its meaning, because for her, it was the first and most precious. Irene looked at the girl in surprise, not understanding her words, and a firm conviction about the true nature of the stone grew inside her. Evie met her gaze with confusion, while Irene maintained her inner confidence, following her family's strict principle of not distorting the truth. It was obvious to her that this was not a fake, but a rare magical stone from the Imperial Palace, whose radiance confirmed its true power. Evie thought about the price of the stone with genuine amazement, feeling a sense of anxious excitement, while Irene calmly realized its true value. The thought that such a stone would fetch a fortune at auction seemed to stun Evie, leaving her in a state of shock. Irene caught this state with a soft smile, realizing how dear this gesture was to the guardian and how deeply it meant to the girl. At that very moment, the silence was broken by the ringing of the clock, and the young lady noticed that evening had already come into its own, reminding her of the inexorable time. Irene quickly got ready, feeling duty-bound to her duties, but in her thoughts remained the desire to return as soon as possible. Evie was getting ready for class with a slight smile, but Irene already knew it was cancelled, and the news gently changed the course of their evening. Irene felt a slight twinge of remorse, realizing that she hadn't told her friend something important earlier, and that it had left a quiet trace of guilt in her soul. She carefully put Evie to bed, sensing her tiredness, and internally insisted that peace was more important than any worries right now. Suddenly, something strange caught her attention, and Irene froze, noticing a vague mark on the back of her friend's hand. Evie quickly hid her hand, trying to remain calm, but her gesture only increased suspicion, making Irene wary. Hiding under the blanket, Evie clung to the hope that her friend hadn't noticed, even though anxiety was already quietly filling the space. Evie understood that she couldn't show her secret, otherwise those around her would reject her, and the fear of loneliness squeezed her heart. She dreamed that the mark on her hand would disappear as quickly as possible, like the trace of a mistake that could not be corrected. After a while, she woke up with a bang, not noticing how deeply she had fallen into sleep, and her heart was pounding with surprise. Evie just wanted to lie down for a while, but she fell asleep by the window and noticed that the sun was already setting, painting the world in fiery tones. She realized her mistake instantly. While squeezing the magic ball, she understood how dangerous it was to hold it in her hands, and she hastened to hide it in the box. But at that very moment, she noticed that there was something in the box, and her heart sank in anxious anticipation. The young lady was taken aback when she saw the handkerchief left at the grave near the palace on the day of her entrance, as if the past had come back to her. Evie stared at the simple scarf, certain it belonged to her, causing a mixture of surprise and tenderness. She was shocked when she realized that the object in the box meant that her guardian was the professor, whose attention seemed so unexpected. Shock gave way to joy. Her heart was filled with light, because what seemed like an accident acquired meaning. In a hurry, she ran to the place of their first meeting, because it was there that their paths crossed for the first time, leaving the memory alive. Evie hurried before the sun completely disappeared, hoping that she would have time to meet him again and not miss the chance. She wanted to thank him for the gift, and then carefully ask if he had sent it by mistake. Humbly hiding the wave of emotion, she understood the value of the item and wanted to return it, leaving nothing to chance and protecting someone else's care. As she crawled through the thicket, she noticed the professor and screamed, and the mark on her hand began to glow, revealing her secret and her alarm at the same time. A moment later, the emperor turned around, hearing the thin voice of a young girl, and his heart trembled slightly in surprise. She greeted him with a smile, and he noticed with bewilderment that the girl seemed to be stuck between fear and curiosity. At that very moment, the emperor came closer and carefully lifted her up, as if protecting her from any adversity. He looked at her closely, checking to see if she was hurt, and Evie gratefully assured him that everything was fine. At that very moment, he asked her why she had come here again, and Evie froze for a moment, unable to find the words to answer. He looked at her hand in surprise, thinking that he might have hurt himself, but she quickly explained that it was just an itch. Clovis sighed heavily, reminding him about the bushes and caution, and Evie, realizing that the mark could have been noticed, assured him that she was fine. But a moment later, the girl was taken aback. Her hand was clean, and relief enveloped her like a soft light. Clovis noticed that she was fine, and her clothes were undamaged. It was as if the bushes had parted on their own, protecting her. Evie thanked the man for the gift with a smile. Her heart filled with warmth and surprise. She admitted that she had never seen a stone like this, shining with a soft light that went out when lightly tapped. She timidly asked if he could confidently give her such a valuable item, since magic stones were incredibly expensive. The emperor was slightly surprised, but smiled, declaring that she was worthy of such a gift and was glad that she liked the stone. He explained that the magic stone was just lying around his house, and she shouldn't feel obligated. Evie was surprised and happy at the same time. A moment later, she asked the professor about his studies, and the emperor was slightly puzzled by the unexpected question. Evie admitted that she had looked for information about him, but had found nothing. Even in the admissions office, no one knew anything. The emperor timidly explained that he had decided not to teach classes this semester and would only be able to open the course next semester, to the girl's delight. The young lady was delighted with this news, feeling pleasant excitement and hope. At that very moment, she asked where his office was, and he was taken aback, confused, and not knowing what to answer. Clovis looked at Seraphina intently and stated that he would like to get an office at the academy, leaving her completely shocked by the unexpected statement. Seraphina thought he had accepted the position against his will, and wondered if he was really willing to go that far. He explained that the girl was looking for him at the academy, and he had no other choice, which made her think deeply. She suggested changing the guardian, since there were many worthy candidates around who were capable of taking care of the girl. She added with a smile that even Professor Males had expressed a desire to stay and take care of his young charge. At that very moment, the emperor could not bear it any longer and shouted angrily that the cabinet simply had to be prepared without any unnecessary discussions. She was shocked, not believing that he could be serious, and thought that it was just a joke. But the emperor immediately explained that he had a lot of work and therefore quickly escorted her out of the office, leaving her no choice. Seraphina was extremely surprised by his abrupt actions and could not hide her inner turmoil. At the same time, she wondered if the emperor really had no intention of changing the girl's guardian, despite all the discussion. After some time, the professor looked at the students with a smile and announced that their lesson had come to an end, causing a slight stir. He announced that the next lesson would be held in the new auditorium of the main building, and the young people greeted the news with enthusiasm. He added with a smile that, although the auditorium was smaller than the others, there were few students in their class, so there would be no crowding. He explained that in their free time, they would be able to use it as a restroom and a place to spend some quiet time. But at the same moment, he warned that if the children became too carried away by the festival and did not do their homework, they would be immediately suspended from classes. A moment later, the young lady sighed heavily, thinking about returning home for the weekend. Feeling slightly tired and anxious, she looked at her friend and admitted that she would like to stay close, never leaving her side for a step, appreciating the friendly warmth. Ruska turned to his friends with a smile, explaining that this weekend was the first time they were allowed to leave the academy. He noted that this is why everyone was returning home to their families, and parents would begin picking up their children in the evening, maintaining order. Irene sighed, thinking that not much time had passed, and she did not understand all the fuss, because relatives had already gathered in her house, waiting for her. Evie asked her friend if he was going home, and he confirmed with a smile that their estate was far away, and he needed to pick up some books. He sighed and admitted that he would most like to stay in the dorm and continue his studies, enjoying the peace and quiet. Ruska looked closely at his friend and noticed that if she stayed in the dorm, she would be lonely, since she was used to the company of friends. The young people listened to these words with interest and slight surprise, noting their friend's concern for her comfort. She explained with a smile that the orphanage was too far from the capital, and she was already used to loneliness, so everything was fine. Evie added that it would be a bit boring without friends, and then the young man suggested going to the festival. He was sure that she would like it, but he didn't have time to finish, because he was distracted by his friends, causing the young lady to feel a slight, amusing surprise. Sometime later, the parents came to pick up their children from the academy, reminding them that the end of the school day was approaching. Evie said goodbye to her friends with a smile and watched them leave, hiding her true plans. She couldn't say that she wanted to go out and see the festival with her own eyes, because the rules forbade her to go without a guardian. She noticed the cool and brightly lit streets of the capital, filling her heart with admiration and slight anxiety. On the day of her admission, she had only seen the city from the carriage window, and now the view of the streets was especially captivating. Evie only took a quick glance, but it was enough to capture the stunning view, and it would remain in her memory forever. She understood that the rules did not allow her to go out without a guardian, so she decided to just sit in her room and read books. The corridor, usually busy, was now empty, and this strange sensation increased her internal tension. She felt a little uneasy and wanted to return to her room as soon as possible, feeling anxious. A moment later, the young lady opened the door and froze for a moment at the unexpected sight. In the distance, she saw the professor, and her heart was filled with delight and joy at the same time. Shock gave way to happiness. She didn't expect to see him on such a day, and his smile made the moment even more wonderful. The emperor looked closely at the young lady, and with a gentle smile, stated that he had been waiting for her, filling the atmosphere with warmth and attention. Evie joyfully hugged the professor tightly, surprising him with her sincere emotionality and childish spontaneity. She admitted with a smile that she was very glad to see him, and her happiness was felt in every movement. Evie inquired why the emperor was in the dormitory at such a late hour, causing him some confusion. He was taken aback for a moment, not knowing how to answer the unexpected question, and his gaze lingered on her curious eyes. But soon he brought her into the office, where the young lady was delighted, because she had never seen anything like it before. She walked up to the shelf of books, amazed by their quantity and variety, as if discovering a whole world of knowledge. Evie asked if the emperor had read all the books. He didn't expect such a question, but answered in the affirmative. Coming closer, he explained that for a professor, this was completely natural, and smiled, observing her surprise. But he was soon taken aback by the variety of books on the shelves. Realizing that her friend had gone a little overboard, Evie looked at him intently and asked if she could come into the office if she didn't understand anything. She admitted that she knew about other professors, but she believed that he would be able to explain complex issues better. The emperor, with a gentle smile, stated that she could come at any time, and if she wished, he would set aside a separate time in the schedule for her. The young lady was surprised, but glad to hear such a thing, and thanked him with a smile, knowing that there would be no refusal. A moment later, their conversation was interrupted by noise outside, and they looked out the window, amazed by the beauty of the festival and the bright fireworks. The emperor looked closely at the girl and asked if she was surprised, since the festival had already begun and the lights were blinding her eyes. He was worried that loud sounds might scare her, but the young lady only approached the window, enchanted by the beauty of the lights. Clovis froze, not expecting to see the girl from such a side. Her delight and sincere admiration amazed him. Then, he suggested going to the festival together, but Evie timidly stated that it was already late, and the interest in the festival was not so great. He sighed heavily, admitting that he wanted to walk around the city with her, but if she didn't want to, there was nothing he could do. The young lady was surprised by his words, feeling a thrill and warmth that slid through her heart at that moment. He sighed heavily and stated that he would be a little sad alone, but at the same time, he could not force the child to go to such an event, even if it did not want to. At that moment, Evie couldn't stand it any longer and shouted that she actually loved festivals and she really wanted to go with him. The emperor looked at her with a gentle smile as he felt calm. After some time, they finally went to the event, and the emperor noticed how she looked with delight at the busy streets. Clovis, without wasting a minute, extended his hand to the young lady. She was surprised, but at that very moment, she took his hand, and with a joyful smile, they walked through the streets. He watched her with a joyful smile as she explored everything new for herself. A moment later, Evie called out to the emperor and asked what the people near them were doing. The emperor stated that they were playing a game, and if someone hit the target, they would eventually win a prize. He stated that if she was interested, they could come closer and play, at which point she shouted that they didn't have to play at all. But still, despite her denial, the emperor noticed that she was watching the game with burning eyes. Evie looked at the professor with a smile and suggested that he look at something else. At that moment, the emperor thought for a moment. He saw that she was constantly suppressing everything she wanted to do and everything she wanted to try. He didn't know what the reason was, but he wanted her to enjoy the walk. At that very moment, he approached a small tent and announced that they would play once. The young lady was shocked, as she did not want such a thing at all. Evie said that everything was fine, and she didn't need anything like that. But then the emperor looked at her with a gentle smile and said that she did not need to worry, because he was simply doing what he wanted. Evie, in turn, felt awkward. And then the man handed the dart to the emperor. The young lady wished the professor good luck with a smile, as she knew he would succeed. A moment later, he tried, but his dart missed its target. Evie looked sharply at the professor and stated that he should aim a little to the right. At that very moment, he threw the dart again, but missed again. The emperor sighed heavily and declared that such a thing was too difficult for him, and for this reason, the game was intended only for children. He looked at the young lady and asked if she wanted to help him. Evie was surprised as she didn't expect that. He looked at her closely and stated that the last attempt was very important, and that is why he was counting on her a lot. She was surprised because he was actually letting her try. Evie looked at the professor with a satisfied smile and declared that in that case she would try her best. Evie stared at the target and focused instantly. A moment later, she threw the dart at the target, closing her eyes and hoping in her heart that she would hit the target. Moments later, they congratulated her because she won. They were shocked because they did not expect this. A moment later, she was given a small but sweet prize. Evie, in turn, was very happy when she heard something like this. At that very moment, she looked at the cute toy with a smile, but told the professor that he should take the prize. He smiled and said that she was really great, but at the same time, he said that this was not the prize he wanted, because he wanted to win the biggest doll. He stated that she could keep the ones like that for herself, or they could just return it to her. Evie was extremely surprised, since she did not want to return such a cute toy at all. At that very moment, she shouted that she would take the press for herself. The emperor looked at her with a satisfied smile, since everything was going according to his plan. She was happy because she had attended the festival, played the game, and received her own toy. Everything was new to her, so she wanted to keep such a prize for the rest of her life. The emperor looked at the found lady with a tender smile, as he saw how happy she was about this. At that very moment, he announced with a smile that he would like to try something with her. The emperor said that he would like to visit with her a shop that they had seen earlier, but a moment later, he was taken aback as the crowd of people surged forward suddenly. He was puzzled and did not understand what had come over them and why they were fussing so much, but he asked his companion with a smile if everything was okay with her. But a moment later, the emperor was taken aback as he realized that he was alone. A moment later, the young lady finally made her way out of the dense crowd, feeling the noise and crush gradually recede. She sighed heavily and looked around, not believing that she had managed to get out of the chaos of the human streams. But a moment later, she was taken aback, realizing that she had absolutely no idea where she was. She called out to the professor, but there was no answer, and the looks of others only increased her fear, and she realized that she had been carried too far. Evie remembered the headmistress's instructions that if you get lost, you need to stay put and wait for help. She walked around the corner, deciding to wait quietly, trying not to disturb anyone and hide from unnecessary attention. Evie believed that if she stayed where she was, the professor would definitely find her, and this thought calmed her down a little. A few minutes later, she looked out and saw passers-by happily celebrating the holiday, as if nothing had happened. Then she moved deeper into the alley and began to quietly draw, trying to distract herself from her disturbing thoughts. Soon she beamed with hope when she heard a noise, thinking that the professor had finally found her. But a moment later, it became clear that there was a stranger in front of her, and the joy instantly gave way to anxiety. The man asked why she was alone in such a place, and there was something alarming in his voice. He tried to find out if she was lost, and Evie was confused, not knowing what to answer, and fear gripped her. The man looked around, as if looking for her relatives, but did not find anyone nearby. With a smirk, he made it clear that she would not be able to deceive him, because he had been watching her for a long time and saw her loneliness. He grabbed her hand abruptly, declaring that she would come with him, and her screams only strengthened his confidence. His gaze was cold, and he hinted that he knew what children like her wanted, increasing her fear. Evie was scared and helpless, realizing that she would not be able to resist him and escape on her own. Meanwhile, the emperor desperately called for her and looked for her everywhere, restless with anxiety. He rushed through the narrow streets of the city, realizing that the crowd could carry her far away, but still hoping to find her nearby. A moment later, the emperor noticed a sweet girl walking arm in arm with a man, and a desperate hope flared up in his heart. At that very moment, he rushed towards her, clinging to the thought that in front of him might be Evie, whom he was so eager to find. But hope was dashed. It wasn't her, and the man reacted sharply, protecting his daughter from someone else's touch. The Emperor froze, overcome with anxiety, and his breathing was ragged. But, overcoming his fear, he forced himself to pull himself together in order to continue the search. The Emperor was shrouded in fear, realizing that what was happening was frighteningly reminiscent of that very tragic day from the past. He returned to the Imperial Palace, where he was met by a knight whose words carried heavy and unbearable news. Hearing this, he stood frozen in a daze, unable to accept reality, as if the world had lost its meaning in an instant. After some time, he was already mourning his wife, whose death left a void in his soul, and he vowed never to experience such a thing again. That is why he decided to find the girl as soon as possible, although he did not know where to start or where to direct the search. Clovis wondered if the only option left was to close off all routes and take the city under strict control. He understood that he could raise the guards and knights, combing the streets to the last alley, leaving no chance for shelter. But suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted when a man approached him and asked if he was looking for a lost child. He described the girl, and the Emperor, filled with hope, seized him, demanding that he immediately tell him where she had been seen. The man was taken aback and said that he had seen her just recently in the square, which only increased the alarm. Clovis immediately apologized, realizing that he had lost control of himself, succumbing to despair. The man suggested that the girl might have ended up in a shelter for lost children, as kidnappings had become more frequent recently. Realizing the danger, the Emperor rushed to the shelter, not noticing anything around him, and driven only by fear for her fate. In his haste, he accidentally bumped into Madame, but without stopping, he still managed to apologize without slowing down. Madame worriedly asked her companion if everything was okay, and he, with a smile, noticed the strength and desperation of the stranger. She was a little upset that such an attractive young man turned out to be devoid of manners, not knowing the reason for his haste. Then she asked how he knew he was looking for a child, and the answer sounded unexpectedly simple. The man smiled and said that everything was clear on his face because panic was visible on it, as if the end of the world had come. He added that the girl and the young man were strikingly similar, and this connection was immediately noticeable to an attentive observer.